Tonight, something in you knew it was time to rest, even if the rest of your mind hasn't quite caught up yet. There is a softness waiting for you here, a kind of permission that the waking world so rarely offers, and all it asks is that you lie still for a while and let these words keep you company. Take a breath, a slow one, the kind that fills your chest and then lingers before it leaves. Let it out gently, as though you were fogging a cold window just to trace something small and meaningless in the glass. There is nowhere else you need to be right now, no version of this moment that requires anything more from you than simply being in it. The day, with all its noise and reaching, has finally loosened its grip on your hours, and what remains is this, just this, the sound of a voice and the quiet that surrounds it. You came here carrying something tonight. Perhaps you can feel it even now, settled somewhere between your shoulders or sitting heavy in the low part of your stomach, a weight that has become so familiar you barely notice it anymore. It doesn't have a single name, this feeling, though it wears many faces throughout the day. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper that says you should have done more, been more, tried harder, or shown up differently. Other times it is subtler than that, just a faint hum of inadequacy running beneath everything you do, like a frequency only you can hear. Most people around you would never guess it was there, because you have become remarkably good at carrying it quietly. That is one of the cruelest things about this particular kind of heaviness, the way it teaches you to hide it so well that even you forget it is something you are carrying. It becomes the background noise of your life, the low static behind every conversation and every quiet moment alone, until you mistake it for simply the way things are. You start to believe that this restless, striving dissatisfaction is just your nature, that the ache of not measuring up is built into who you are rather than something that was built around you, brick by careful brick, over many years. But tonight, in this space between waking and sleep, you do not need to perform for anyone, least of all for yourself. The covers around you are not grading your performance. The pillow beneath your head does not require a resume. Whatever room you are lying in right now, it is holding you without conditions, the way the ground holds a tree without once asking it to justify its roots. Think for a moment about how your day began, not the specifics of it, but the feeling underneath. There may have been a moment, even before your feet touched the floor, when some part of you was already calculating, already running through the invisible checklist of all the things you needed to prove before nightfall. So many mornings begin this way, with a subtle tension between who you are in that first drowsy breath and who you believe yourself required to be by the time you step out the door. The distance between those two selves, the one who is simply alive and the one who must earn the right to feel okay about it, is where so much of your exhaustion lives. It is a particular kind of tired, this one. It doesn't always come from too many hours of work or too few hours of sleep, though those things certainly play their part. This weariness runs deeper, settling into the marrow of your days, because it is the tiredness of constantly measuring yourself against a standard that moves every time you get close to reaching it. You finish one task and the next is already waiting with its quiet judgment. You show up for the people you love and still somehow feel as though the version of yourself that showed up wasn't quite the right one, wasn't generous enough or patient enough, wasn't fully present in the way you imagine other people manage to be. There is a voice that narrates all of this, and you know the one, that inner critic who has memorized every shortcoming and replays them at the most inconvenient times. It speaks in your own tone, which is part of what makes it so convincing, so difficult to argue with. When someone else criticizes you, there is at least the possibility of disagreement, a space between their words and your belief. But when the voice is your own, the accusation and the verdict arrive together, and there is no gap to slip a kinder thought through. Here in the dark, with your eyes closed or closing, you might notice how that voice has been with you today. Perhaps it pointed out the email you forgot to send, the hour you wasted when you should have been productive. Perhaps it reminded you of larger things too, the goals you haven't reached, the life you imagined having by now, and where it seems like everyone else has already arrived. These are heavy things to carry through a single day. Heavier still once you realize how long you have been carrying them through hundreds of days, thousands of them, packing each small failure into the same worn bag and hoisting it onto your shoulders every morning. What if, just for tonight, you set that bag down at the door? Not forever, not with some grand declaration that you are cured of the habit of doubting yourself, but simply for these next few breaths, these next few minutes, this one gentle hour. Tomorrow you can pick it all back up again if you choose to. Every worry and every harsh self-assessment will still be there in the morning, faithful as ever. Nothing is lost by letting them rest on the floor tonight while you rest in your bed, and there is something profoundly kind about giving yourself that permission, even temporarily. You are not broken for feeling this way, not weak or ungrateful or lacking in perspective. The ache of not enough is one of the most common human experiences there is, so common that nearly every person you passed on the street today was carrying their own version of it, hidden behind the same composed face you wore. Your colleague who seems so effortlessly competent has their own late-night inventory of failures. Even the friend whose life looks so beautifully assembled from the outside has a private list of ways they believe themselves to be falling short. This is not to diminish what you feel, but to let you know that you are in vast and gentle company, that the loneliness of inadequacy is, paradoxically, one of the most shared experiences on Earth. Something about the nighttime makes these feelings both sharper and softer at once. Sharper because the distractions of the day have fallen away, leaving you alone with your thoughts in a way that the busy hours rarely allow. Softer because the darkness itself is a kind of forgiveness, a signal from the sky that the time for effort is over and the time for surrender has arrived. Every living creature responds to this signal. The birds go quiet, the flowers close, even the trees slow the movement of water through their limbs. You are allowed the same release, the same ancient permission to stop reaching and simply be held by the hours. Let your body settle a little deeper into the surface beneath you, feeling the way it supports your weight without asking you to be lighter. Notice the places where tension has been living, perhaps in your jaw, perhaps in the small muscles around your eyes, perhaps in the way your hands are curled into loose fists even now, as though bracing for something that isn't coming. Wherever you find that tension, breathe into it gently, not forcing it to leave, but simply letting it know that it is noticed, that it has done its job of keeping you alert and ready, and that for now, for just this small window of time, it can soften. The world asks so much of you, day after day after day, and you have answered that asking with such faithfulness, even on the days when your answer felt insufficient. Every morning you rose and tried again, which is its own quiet form of courage, the kind that rarely gets recognized because it looks so ordinary from the outside. Getting out of bed when you are tired of feeling behind, showing up to your life when part of you wants to hide from it, continuing to care about doing well even when the scoreboard in your head never seems to tip in your favor. These are not small things. These are the acts of someone who has not given up, no matter how many times that inner voice has suggested they should. So tonight, as the minutes grow softer and the silence between these words grows wider, let yourself be seen in a way that the daylight doesn't allow. Not the curated version or the one who has it together, not the one who smiles at the right times and says the right things. Let the tired one come forward, the one who has been carrying that invisible weight for so long that their arms ache even when they are empty. Let the uncertain one come forward, the one who lies awake sometimes and wonders if everyone else receives some instruction manual for life that somehow passed them by. Those parts of you are welcome here. They do not need to be fixed or improved upon, not tonight. They simply need to be allowed to exist without the usual layer of judgment pressing down on them, the way a plant needs nothing more than to be left in the sun and given water. You have been so busy trying to become enough that you may have forgotten what it feels like to simply be, without qualification or apology, free from the constant background hum of striving. Breathe again, slowly, letting the exhale carry a little more of the day's weight out of your chest. Feel the rhythm of your own breathing, that patient, automatic tide that has been keeping you alive since the very first moment you arrived in this world. It has never once asked you to earn it. Not once has it paused to evaluate whether you deserve the next breath. Still it gives and gives, with a generosity so complete that you rarely even notice it, and there is a lesson in that, if you are willing to receive it gently. For now, let these words be a hand resting lightly on your shoulder, not pushing you in any direction, not asking you to be anywhere other than exactly where you are. The night is long and the quiet is deep, and somewhere inside that quiet, there is a version of rest that doesn't require you to have earned it first. It is waiting for you the way sleep waits for every living thing, without conditions or thresholds to cross, asking nothing about whether you have done enough today to deserve it. You have done enough. Let that land, even if every instinct tells you to argue with it, even if the familiar voice rises up to present its evidence to the contrary. Just for now, let the words sit beside you without challenge. You have done enough, and you are allowed to close your eyes. Chapter 2. The Hungry Ghost. There is a creature that lives inside the wanting, and it has been with you for longer than you can remember. It does not have a face exactly, though sometimes it wears the face of ambition or desire, or that restless itch that appears on a quiet Sunday afternoon when everything should feel fine but somehow doesn't. You have felt it stir in the middle of a perfectly good meal, whispering that something better exists somewhere else. You have felt it rise in the hour after a success, when the glow fades faster than expected and leaves behind a strange, hollow aftertaste. In certain Buddhist traditions, they speak of hungry ghosts, beings with enormous, swollen bellies and throats so narrow that nothing can pass through. The image is striking because it captures something that rational language often fails to hold. The hunger is real, achingly real, but the capacity to be filled has been compromised in some fundamental way. No matter how much passes the lips, it cannot reach the place that needs it most. You may recognize this feeling without ever having heard the term, because it is one of the most common experiences of being human and one of the least discussed. Think about the last time you wanted something with that particular intensity, the kind that tightens the chest and narrows the vision until the whole world seems to point toward one specific outcome. Perhaps it was a job, a relationship, a number in a bank account. Perhaps it was something smaller, a compliment you needed to hear, an invitation you were waiting for, a message that would confirm you still mattered to someone. In that moment of wanting, there was a quiet promise embedded in the desire itself, a promise that said once this arrives, the aching will stop. Sometimes the thing did arrive, sometimes you got exactly what you asked for, and for a little while, the world opened up into that warm, expansive feeling of satisfaction, the tension released, the shoulders dropped, everything felt, for a breath or two, genuinely enough. But then something shifted, didn't it? The warmth began to cool, slowly at first, then with a momentum that felt almost cruel. That new job became the familiar job, and the relationship settled into patterns. Soon the number in the account began to feel insufficient against some larger number that had appeared on the horizon. The hungry ghost stirred again, turning its enormous, empty belly toward the next thing. This is not a flaw in your character. It is worth saying that clearly, because so many voices in the world would have you believe otherwise. Entire industries are built on the assumption that your dissatisfaction is a problem to be solved through purchase, through achievement, through self-improvement plans that promise transformation in 30 days or your money back. The message is everywhere, woven so deeply into the fabric of daily life that it becomes invisible, like the hum of electricity in the walls. Something is missing. The message says, buy this, do this, become this, and the missing piece will finally click into place. But what if the missing piece is not actually missing? What if the sensation of absence is itself the product of a particular way of looking, a lens that filters out fullness and magnifies lack? This is not a trick question, and it is not meant to dismiss the very real struggles that shape a life. Sometimes things genuinely are missing: food, safety, love, justice. Those absences are concrete, and they deserve concrete responses. What the hungry ghost represents, though, is something different. It is the absence that persists even when the concrete needs are met. It is the emptiness that remains after the plate is full, the rent is paid, and the people who love you have said so clearly enough that any reasonable person would believe them. You have probably noticed that the hunger tends to escalate. The first apartment felt wonderful until someone mentioned a larger one. The first car felt like freedom until it sat next to a nicer model in the parking lot. Each satisfaction contains within it the seed of the next dissatisfaction, because the hungry ghost does not actually want the thing it claims to want. It wants the wanting to stop. It wants the peace that it imagines lives on the other side of having, without understanding that having and peace occupy different territories altogether. There is a particular cruelty in this pattern, and it deserves to be named. When the next achievement or acquisition fails to deliver the promised relief, the conclusion most people reach is not that the promise was false. Instead, the conclusion turns inward. Perhaps I wanted the wrong thing, the thinking goes. Perhaps I need to want better, want smarter, want with more precision. The failure of wanting to satisfy is reinterpreted as a failure of the self to want correctly, and so the cycle deepens rather than breaking. The ghost grows hungrier still, convinced that the right meal is out there somewhere if only it could develop better taste. Tonight, lying here in the gentle dark, you have permission to notice the ghost without feeding it. You do not need to wrestle it into submission or analyze its origins just yet. Simply noticing that it exists, that it has been running the show with its frantic whispers of more and next and not yet, is itself a profound act of awareness. The ghost has been so constant, so familiar, that it may have come to feel like you, like your own voice, your own nature. But here in the quiet, with nowhere to go and nothing to acquire, there is just enough space to notice that the hunger is something you experience, rather than something you are. Consider water for a moment. When you are genuinely thirsty, a glass of cool water is one of the most satisfying experiences available to a human body. The satisfaction is complete because the need is real, specific, and the remedy matches it precisely. Now consider trying to use that same glass of water to satisfy loneliness, or existential dread, or the nagging sense that your life should look different than it does. The water is still good, still pure, still exactly what it is. But when asked to fill a need it was never designed to meet, it will always come up short. This is what happens when material solutions are applied to spiritual hungers. It is nobody's fault, exactly. The confusion is ancient. What the hungry ghost really craves, beneath all its disguises, is a kind of okayness that doesn't depend on conditions. It wants to feel that this moment, this breath, this quietly beating heart is sufficient, not because anything has been added, but because nothing was ever truly missing from the essential fact of being alive. That sounds simple, and in some ways it is the simplest thing in the world. Yet simplicity is often the last destination, not the first, because the mind has to exhaust its complicated strategies before it is willing to consider that the answer might have been closer than it ever imagined. You do not need to arrive at that understanding tonight. The mere fact that the hungry ghost has been named, brought out of the shadows and into the gentle light of awareness, is enough for now. In the naming, something subtle shifts. The automatic quality of the wanting loosens, just slightly. The way a knot begins to ease when you stop pulling both ends and simply hold it in your hands. The ghost is still there, but it is being seen now, perhaps for the first time in a long while, and being seen is different from being obeyed. So let the wanting be here if it wants to be here. Let it sit in the room like an old guest who has overstayed but means no harm. You do not need to show it the door tonight, and you do not need to set another place at the table. It is enough to notice its presence, to feel the familiar shape of its hunger without automatically reaching for the nearest thing to stuff into the void. In this noticing, something quieter begins to make itself known, something that was always here beneath the noise of acquisition, patient as bedrock, waiting for exactly this kind of stillness. The breath continues its steady rhythm in and out, asking nothing of you in return. The body has settled into the surface beneath it, and gravity is doing its ancient, reliable work of holding you in place. Whatever the hungry ghost will want tomorrow, whatever campaigns of desire it will launch in the brightness of another day, right now it can rest. Right now, in this particular darkness, on this particular darkness, on this particular night, the hunger does not need to be sobbed. It only needs to be held, gently, the way you might hold a frightened animal until its trembling begins to slow and something in its wide, startled eyes finally begins to soften. Perhaps you have tried to reason with the ghost, to sit it down and explain that it has enough, that the evidence of enough is everywhere if it would only look. But the ghost does not respond to reason, because it was not born from reason, it was born from something deeper, something proverbial and ancient, a sensation that settled into the body before words were available to describe it. The first time you reached for something and it was not there, the first time a need went unmet and the world revealed itself as a place where wanting and having are not the same thing, the ghost took its first breath. It has been breathing ever since, and logic is not the language it speaks. What the ghost responds to, if it responds to anything at all, is presence. Not the presence of another acquisition or another milestone, but the simple, unadorned presence of awareness itself. When you stop running toward the next thing long enough to notice what is already here, something in the ghost's frantic energy begins to slow. It is as though the creature has been running in circles precisely because no one was watching, and the moment a steady, compassionate gaze lands on it, the urgency loses some of its grip. This is not a cure. The ghost may never disappear entirely, and expecting it to would be just another form of wanting. But it can become quieter, less desperate, more willing to sit in the room without overturning every piece of furniture in its search for something it cannot name. There is nowhere else to be. There is nothing else to get. The ghost can close its enormous, weary eyes, and for once, the emptiness in its belly can simply be empty, not a problem, not a crisis, not a call to action, but just space, just openness, just the quiet, breathing dark, holding everything and asking for nothing in return. Let that be enough for now. Let the simplicity of this moment, the blanket's weight, the pillow's familiar shape, be the kind of nourishment that doesn't need a throat wide enough to swallow the whole world. Sometimes the smallest sip is the one that finally reaches the place where the thirst actually lives. Sometimes resting is the bravest thing the hungry ghost can do. Chapter 3: The Measuring Mind. Somewhere along the way, you picked up a ruler, not a physical one, though the metaphor holds, but a kind of invisible instrument that you carry everywhere, measuring everything you encounter against some standard that keeps shifting just enough to ensure the measurements never come out right. You measure your body against other bodies, your career against other careers, your quiet Tuesday evenings against the curated spectacles that glow from other people's screens. The ruler is always in your hand, so constantly present that you may have forgotten you are holding it at all. This is the measuring mind, and it has been working overtime for as long as you can remember. It is the part of you that wakes in the morning and begins the calculation before your feet even touch the floor. How did yesterday go? It asks, running the numbers with the dispassion of an accountant who has never once found the books to balance. Were you productive enough, kind enough, disciplined enough, present enough, kind enough, present enough, successful enough, The word enough appears at the end of every question like a period that never quite closes the sentence, because the measuring mind is constitutionally incapable of arriving at a final sum. There is always one more column to add, one more variable to consider, one more variable to consider, one more variable to consider, one more way the total might come up short. The origins of this habit are worth tracing, not to assign blame, but to understand the machinery well enough to recognize when it is running. Almost every human being learns to measure themselves against others before they learn to read. Watch a playground for 10 minutes, and you will see it happening in real time, children glancing sideways to determine who is fastest, who is chosen first, who receives the most visible approval from the adults standing at the edges. This is not cruelty. It is the nervous system doing what nervous systems do, scanning the social environment for information about safety and belonging. The child who understands where they stand in the group is the child who can navigate it most effectively, and for most of human history, navigating the group was the difference between survival and something much worse. But what begins as a survival strategy hardens, over time, into something far more rigid and far less useful. The measuring that once served a genuine purpose, keeping you attuned to social signals, helping you adapt and fit and find your people, becomes a prison of constant comparison. The playground grows into a classroom, the classroom into a workplace, and the workplace into the entire landscape of adult life, where the measurements have become so numerous and so contradictory that no single human being could possibly satisfy them all. Be ambitious, but also content, confident, but also humble, show success, but don't let anyone think you're trying too hard. The ruler keeps measuring, but the units keep changing, and the target keeps moving, and the verdict is always the same. Not quite there, almost but never fully arrived, close but never close enough. Inside the measuring mind lives a figure you know well, even if you have never given it a name. Some people call it the inner critic, though that term has become so common it risks losing its sharpness. This figure is not simply critical in the way that a thoughtful friend might offer honest feedback. It is relentless, returning to the same sore points with a persistence that would be admirable if it were directed toward anything constructive. It remembers every stumble with perfect clarity while discarding achievements as though they were written on water. You may have noticed that it speaks in absolutes, always, never, everyone, no one, deploying these words with the authority of settled fact when in truth they are almost always exaggerations built on the shakiest of evidence. The critic's voice can be startlingly specific. It knows your particular vulnerabilities the way a locksmith knows a lock, because it was built from the inside, constructed over years from every sharp word, every disappointed look, every moment when the world seemed to say that who you were was not quite who you should be. Perhaps a teacher's offhand comment about your abilities settled into the foundation of how you see yourself. A single sentence that was forgotten by the speaker before the end of the school day, but that you carried forward for decades, polishing it with repetition until it gleamed with the false authority of established truth. Perhaps a parent's anxiety, expressed as criticism because anxiety often wears that disguise, became the template for how you learn to speak to yourself in the privacy of your own mind. None of this is to say that the people who shaped you were villains. Most of them were doing their best with the tools they had, which were often handed to them by people who were also doing their best with even fewer tools. The measuring mind is less like a wound inflicted by a single blow and more like a path worn into the earth by thousands of footsteps, most of them well-intentioned, all of them contributing to a groove that eventually becomes difficult to step out of. Understanding this is not about finding someone to hold responsible. It is about recognizing that the voice in your head, the one that says you are not enough, is not the voice of truth. It is the voice of accumulated habit, and habits, even very old ones, can be seen for what they are. There is something the measuring mind does that is particularly worth noticing tonight, here in the stillness, as the body settles and the day recedes. It measures not only your external achievements but also your internal states. It takes the very feelings you are experiencing and subjects them to evaluation, asking whether you are relaxing correctly, whether you are anxious about the right things or the wrong things, whether your response to your own stress is itself stressful enough to warrant concern. This recursive quality, this habit of turning the ruler inward and measuring the measurement, creates a kind of hall of mirrors in which it becomes impossible to simply feel what you feel without simultaneously judging the feeling. Sadness becomes not just sadness, but evidence of weakness. Joy becomes suspect, something that probably won't last, so better not trust it too much. Notice, if you can, the way the measuring mind might even now be evaluating your experience of this moment. Are you relaxing fast enough? Is your mind quiet enough? Are you listening to this the right way? See how the ruler appears in the most unexpected places, how it slides into even the act of rest and begins its tireless calculations. You do not need to fight this tendency. Fighting it is just another form of measurement, the measuring mind measuring its own measurement and finding it wanting. Instead, consider simply seeing it, the way you might watch a bird land on a branch outside your window, noticing its arrival without reaching for it or shooing it away. The truth is that the measuring mind, for all its exhausting persistence, is trying to protect you. Its logic is crude but coherent. If I can figure out exactly where the standard is and exactly where I fall short, then I can close the gap and be safe. The safety it seeks is not physical, usually, but something more subtle and more desperate. It is the safety of belonging, the assurance that you will not be cast out, overlooked, or left behind. Every measurement is, at its root, a question about love. Am I lovable as I am, or do I need to be more, do more, fix more, in order to deserve the warmth of connection? What the measuring mind does not understand, what it cannot understand because understanding this would put it out of a job, is that the warmth it seeks cannot be earned through better numbers. Love does not arrive as the conclusion of a calculation. It arrives when it arrives as a kind of grace that has nothing to do with deserving and everything to do with presence. The child who is loved is not loved because they scored highest on some invisible test. They are loved because they are there, because they exist, because their small face appeared in the world and someone's heart opened in response. That opening is not a transaction. It cannot be replicated by getting the measurements right. Tonight, the ruler can be set down, not thrown away, because it will be there in the morning, familiar as your own hand, ready to begin its calculations with the first light. But right now, in this small pocket of darkness, there is nothing that needs to be measured. Your worth is not a number that can be arrived at through addition or subtraction. It is not a figure that fluctuates with the market of other people's opinions. It is something more like a constant, though even that word suggests too much of the mathematical, as though the measuring mind might try to quantify it. Let the body be heavy. Let the thoughts come and go without subjecting them to evaluation. If the critic's voice arises, as it probably will because old habits are patient, let it speak without obeying. You have been listening to its assessments for so long that its voice and your own may have become almost indistinguishable. But tonight, in the quiet, you can begin to notice the difference. Your voice is the one that is tired. Your voice is the one that wants to rest. The critic's voice is the one that says you have not yet earned the right to rest, that there is still more to do, more to prove, more to become before you can allow yourself this simple surrender. The critic is wrong. It has always been wrong about this particular point, even when it has been occasionally useful about others. Rest is not a reward for sufficient effort. Sleep is not a prize given to those whose measurements finally came out right. They are needs, as fundamental as water, and you do not ask water to justify itself before you drink. The measuring mind can keep its ruler, its columns, its endless calculations. Here, in the space between waking and sleeping, none of those figures matter. Feel the places where the body meets the bed, those points of gentle pressure where gravity and softness negotiate their ancient agreement. Each point of contact is a place where you are held without being judged. The bed does not ask whether you have accomplished enough today. The pillow does not evaluate the quality of your thoughts. They simply receive you as you are, with all your unmeasured, immeasurable complexity, and in their simple material way, they demonstrate something the measuring mind has never been able to grasp. Sometimes enough is not a quantity at all. Sometimes it is just a place where you can finally put the ruler down and let yourself be exactly the size you already are. Chapter 4: The Shadow. There are parts of yourself you learn to hide so early that the hiding became invisible. Like a room in a house whose door was sealed so long ago that the walls grew around it, these parts exist in a space you may have forgotten was ever open. They are the qualities, the impulses, those tender or fierce or awkward facets of your being that, at some point, receive the message that they were not welcome. Not old at once, usually, but through a slow accumulation of small signals, raised eyebrows and turned backs and silences that spoke louder than any direct instruction could have. Carl Jung called this hidden territory the shadow, and while the word has taken on a certain popular mystique, the reality it points to is remarkably ordinary. Every human being carries one. It is the collection of everything you were told, directly or indirectly, does not belong in the version of yourself that the world wants to see. Perhaps your sadness was inconvenient, so it went into the shadow. Maybe your anger frightened someone, so it went into the shadow too. Or perhaps your sensitivity, your silliness, a hunger for attention, your fierce independence, or your deep need for closeness were each, in their turn, gently or not so gently escorted out of the light and into that sealed room. The shadow is not made of your worst qualities, though this is the common misunderstanding. It is made of your rejected qualities, and the difference matters enormously. Some of what lives in the shadow is genuinely difficult. Yes, aggression, jealousy, the capacity for cruelty that exists in every human heart. But alongside these darker elements sit qualities that are anything but dark. Your playfulness might be in there, sealed away because someone once told you to grow up. Your vulnerability might be in there, locked behind a door because showing it once led to pain. Even your brilliance might be in there, dimmed because shining too brightly made someone uncomfortable, and you learned, with the terrible efficiency of a child, that smallness was the price of belonging. This is the quiet tragedy of the not enough feeling. It is not only that you believe yourself to be insufficient, it is that you have actively removed parts of yourself in an attempt to become sufficient, like a sculptor chipping away not at marble but at their own body, trying to carve themselves into a shape that will finally earn approval. Each piece removed was a sacrifice made in good faith, an offering to the gods of acceptance. Be less loud, less needy. Soften your anger, shrink your presence. With each subtraction, the remaining self felt thinner, less substantial, more like an outline than a solid form. No wonder the feeling of not enough persists. You have been making yourself literally less in the hope of becoming enough, and the math will never work because it was never meant to. The shadow does not disappear simply because it has been banished from sight. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand about the parts of yourself that were pushed away. They continue to live and move and exert their influence, but they do so from the basement rather than the living room, which means their expression becomes distorted, indirect, harder to trace back to its source. The anger you were not allowed to feel becomes a chronic tension in the jaw, a tightness in the shoulders that no amount of stretching fully resolves. Grief that was not allowed to show surfaces as numbness, a strange inability to feel much of anything, even when the circumstances clearly call for feeling. Meanwhile, the playfulness you suppressed emerges as a nagging restlessness, a sense that life has become too serious, too heavy, without quite knowing why. You may have encountered your shadow in moments that surprised you. moments when a reaction seemed disproportionate to the situation, when a small trigger produced a large response, when you found yourself saying or doing something that felt foreign, as though another person were briefly at the controls. These are the moments when the sealed door rattles on its hinges, when the pressure inside the hidden room builds to a point where something has to give. They are uncomfortable moments, sometimes frightening ones, but they are also invitations. They are the shadow knocking, asking to be let back in from the cold. Tonight, in the safety of this darkness, you can consider the possibility that nothing about you was ever truly wrong. Not the sadness, not the anger, not the hunger, not the sensitivity, not the ambition, not the fear. These were all natural responses to the experience of being alive, and the fact that some of them were deemed unacceptable says far more about the environment that made that judgment than about the qualities themselves. A flower does not decide which of its petals to remove based on which ones the wind favors. It simply grows in its completeness, and the wind adjusts or it does not. This is not to say that every impulse should be acted upon without consideration. The shadow, like any powerful force, benefits from being held with awareness rather than unleashed without reflection. What matters is not to become the anger or to drown in the grief, but to allow these experiences to exist within you without the additional burden of shame, to recognize them as legitimate inhabitants of the house rather than intruders to be repelled. When anger is welcomed rather than fought, it often has something important to communicate, a boundary that needs defending, a value that has been crossed. When grief is allowed rather than suppressed, it moves through the body like weather, intense but temporary, leaving the air cleaner in its wake. Consider what might happen if the sealed room were gently opened, not all at once but slowly, the way dawn opens a landscape. First, just a crack, enough to let a sliver of light fall on whatever has been living there in the dark. You might find that what you expected to be monstrous is actually just lonely. The parts of yourself that were banished have been sitting in that room for years, waiting to be invited back, and they are not the dangerous creatures your childhood mind imagined them to be. They are more like lost children, bewildered at having been sent away, carrying gifts they were never allowed to deliver. The not enough feeling feeds on division, on the belief that the self must be curated, edited, and presented in a carefully controlled package in order to be worthy of love. Every time a quality is pushed into the shadow, the feeling of insufficiency deepens, because on some level the psyche knows that wholeness has been sacrificed. You cannot feel complete while actively maintaining the incompleteness, while standing guard at a door that separates you from yourself. The exhaustion of this project, the constant vigilance required to keep the unacceptable parts out of sight, is itself a significant portion of the tiredness you carry into this bed tonight. So let the guard stand down, just for these hours of rest. Let the muscles that have been clenching around the shadow begin to soften, not because some dramatic integration needs to happen right now, but because the effort of holding yourself apart from yourself is the kind of work that the night was designed to interrupt. Sleep does not ask which parts of you are acceptable. Dreams do not discriminate between light and dark, between approved and banished. In the democracy of the unconscious, every part of you has equal standing, equal voice, equal right to the stage. Feel how the body responds when the effort of holding back relaxes, even slightly. There might be a settling, a deepening of the breath, a sensation of something flowing into a space that has been empty for a long time. This is not dramatic. It is not a breakthrough or a healing crisis. It is simply the natural movement of a living system toward its own completeness, the way water finds its level when the barriers are removed. Nothing is being fixed right now. Something is simply being allowed, a little more of yourself becoming present in this moment, and that is sufficient. You might wonder, lying here, what your particular shadow contains. The specifics will be different for everyone, shaped by the unique constellation of experiences that made you who you are. but the general architecture is remarkably consistent. Somewhere in there lives the version of yourself that was too much for someone who mattered. Somewhere in there lives the version of yourself that was too much for someone else. These two exiles often coexist in the same dark room, the too much and the not enough sitting side by side, both carrying the same fundamental wound, which is the wound of conditional acceptance. The message they both received was the same, only delivered in different packaging. You are welcome here, but only if you are this shape, this size, this temperament, this particular configuration of human qualities. What would it mean to welcome them both back? Not in some grand, ceremonial way, but in the quiet, almost invisible way that the body welcomes the exhale after holding the breath. The too much of you and the not enough of you are not opposing forces. They are different faces of the same wholeness, and wholeness does not require that every part be perfect or even particularly well behaved. It requires only that every part be acknowledged, given space, allowed to breathe in the same room as the rest of who you are. The shadow is not your enemy, it is your depth. It is the rich, dark soil from which the most genuine parts of your life have always grown, even when you could not see the roots. Tonight, as sleep begins to gather at the edges of awareness, let the wholeness of who you are, the acceptable and the unacceptable, light alongside dark, praised alongside hidden, rest together in the same bed. They have been separated for long enough. In the forgiving darkness of this night, there is room for all of it, every banished quality, every sealed door, every gift that was turned away at the threshold. Let it all be here, let it all rest. There is a particular gentleness available in this moment, the gentleness of a truce between the parts of yourself that have been at war for so long they may have forgotten what peace feels like. The light and the dark are not enemies, they are neighbors, separated by a wall that was built out of fear, and the wall has been standing long enough. In the quiet of this night, you can feel its foundation softening, not collapsing, not crumbling, but simply becoming less rigid, allowing a little warmth to pass through where before there was only cold stone. The night is wide enough and generous enough to hold the whole of you, and it has been waiting to do exactly that. Chapter 5. What you can hold. Nearly 2,000 years ago, a man sat down to write to himself. He was, at the time, the most powerful person in the known world, an emperor whose decisions shaped the lives of millions, whose armies held the borders of an empire stretching from the rain-soaked hills of Britain to the sun-baked deserts of North Africa. His name was Marcus Aurelius, and the private journal he kept was never meant to be read by anyone else. It was a conversation between a man and his own mind, and what strikes anyone who reads it today is not the grandeur of his position, but the ordinariness of his struggles. He was tired, frustrated, surrounded by people who disappointed him, and he disappointed himself more often than he would have liked. He was, in other words, recognizably human, despite the purple robes and the legions. What Marcus returned to again and again in those private pages was a single, deceptively simple distinction. There are things within our control, he wrote, in various formulations and with varying degrees of patience toward himself. There are things outside of it. The art of a well-lived life, he suggested, lies in learning to tell the difference. This was not original to him. He inherited the idea from earlier Stoic thinkers who had been refining it for centuries. The power of the insight does not depend on its novelty. It depends on how deeply it is felt, and Marcus felt it deeply, returning to it the way a tired swimmer returns to a buoy in rough water. The reason this ancient observation matters tonight, in this bed, in this particular darkness, is that so much of the not enough feeling is rooted in a confusion between these two categories. You have been carrying weight that does not belong to you, holding yourself responsible for outcomes that were never in your hands, measuring yourself against results that depended on 1,000 variables beyond your influence. The promotion that went to someone else, the relationship that ended despite your best efforts, or the way someone's face closed when you said the thing you thought was right, along with the weather of other people's moods, the direction of economies, and the slow drift of circumstances that no amount of planning could have predicted or prevented. None of this is to say that your choices do not matter. They matter enormously. The effort you bring, the integrity with which you act, the attention you pay to the people and responsibilities in your care, these are entirely within your domain, and they are worthy of your full engagement. What lies outside that domain, though, is the outcome. You can prepare thoroughly and still fail, love generously and still be left. Ganmenyo is the outcome. You can prepare thoroughly and still fail, love genuinely. It is possible to do everything right by any reasonable standard and still watch the thing you wanted slip away, because the universe does not operate on a merit system, however much the mind might wish it did. This is hard to accept. It may be one of the hardest things a human being is asked to accept, and it is asked of you not once but continuously, in every area of life where effort and outcome refuse to maintain the neat, linear relationship you were taught to expect. The hardness of it is real, and it deserves acknowledgement rather than dismissal. There is genuine grief in recognizing that control is more limited than you believed, that your ability to shape the world stops well short of the boundaries you imagined. This grief is not weakness. It is the appropriate response to encountering the truth about the human situation, which is that we are participants in a story much larger than ourselves, with far less editorial authority than we would like. But within that limited authority, there is something astonishing. Within the territory of what you can actually hold, what you can actually influence, there is a kind of freedom that the not enough feeling has been obscuring. When you stop demanding of yourself that you control the uncontrollable, the energy that was being poured into that impossible project becomes available for something else. It becomes available for presence, for attention, for the kind of engaged, clear-eyed participation in your own life that does not depend on guarantees about how things will turn out. Think about what it would feel like to release, right now, every outcome you have been gripping. Not the effort, not the care, not the love, but the specific results you have been insisting must materialize in order for everything to be okay. Feel, if you can, the way the hands might soften if they were no longer clenching around a future they cannot secure. Feel the way the jaw might unclench if it were no longer bracing against the possibility of failure. This is not resignation. It is not giving up. It is the recognition that your worth was never contingent on results, that who you are is expressed in the reaching, not captured in the catching. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from trying to control what cannot be controlled, and it is different from the healthy tiredness of genuine effort. It is the exhaustion of fighting the current rather than swimming with it, of insisting that the river flow uphill because that is the direction you need it to go. You may recognize this exhaustion in your body right now, a tiredness that goes deeper than the physical, a weariness that sleep alone cannot fully address because it is generated not by activity, but by resistance. The body has been tense with the effort of holding everything in place, and everything does not want to be held in place. Everything wants to move, to shift, to change, because movement and change are the nature of everything. Marcus Aurelius would be the first to admit that knowing this intellectually and living it practically are very different achievements. He wrote the same reminders to himself over and over, which tells you that the insight was not one he mastered but one he continuously practiced. Each morning he woke and the mind began its familiar campaign to expand the borders of control, to grip tighter, to worry further ahead, to take responsibility for things that belong to the gods or to chance or to other people's free choices. Each morning he had to gently, firmly bring himself back to the distinction. This is mine. That is not. This I can tend to. That I must release. Tonight you can practice this same ancient gesture of sorting, not with the rigidity of a philosophy lecture, but with the tenderness of someone laying down a burden they have been carrying too long. What is yours to hold, truly yours, the quality of your attention and the kindness you offer, the honesty with which you meet yourself, along with the care you bring to the small, daily acts that compose a life. These are within your hands, and they are not small things, even when the world treats them as such. They are, in fact, the only things that have ever been truly yours, and there is a strange, quiet sufficiency in recognizing that they are enough. Everything else, the outcomes, the opinions, that vast machinery of circumstance that grinds on regardless of your preferences, can be set down for now, not abandoned, because tomorrow you will pick up whatever portion of it is genuinely yours to carry, and you will carry it with whatever strength and grace you can muster. But right now, in the dark, with the day behind you and the next day still unformed, the sorting can be complete. This is mine, that is not. This I hold with care, that I release with something approaching, if not quite reaching, peace. The breath knows this distinction instinctively. Each inhale is a taking in, a gathering of what is needed. Each exhale is a letting go, a releasing of what has been used. The body does not try to hold the breath indefinitely. It does not grip the air and refuse to let it leave, terrified that the next breath might not come. It trusts the rhythm, the ancient exchange between the body and the world, and in that trust, there is a kind of sufficiency that the anxious mind has been searching for in all the wrong places. Let the exhale take something with it now, not a specific worry, necessarily, though if one comes to mind you are welcome to let it go. Just the general weight of carrying more than is yours to carry, the accumulated tension of a life spent trying to hold together things that were never meant to be held by a single pair of hands. The night is here to share the weight. Gravity is here to share the weight. The pillow and the blanket and the quiet, steady dark are all here, doing their part, holding what they can hold so that you do not have to hold everything alone. Sufficiency is not about having everything you want. It is about recognizing that what you have, what you genuinely hold within the scope of your own agency and attention, is a complete set. Nothing is missing from the collection of things that are truly yours. The incompleteness you feel is the incompleteness of trying to possess what was never meant to be possessed, and that is a burden you can lay down without losing anything that matters. What remains when the excess is released is not poverty but clarity, the clear, clean feeling of standing on solid ground with open hands, ready for whatever comes but no longer demanding that it come in a particular form. There is a story, perhaps apocryphal but no less useful for that, about a monkey trap used in certain parts of the world. A hollow gourd is secured to a tree with a hole just large enough for a monkey's open hand to pass through. Inside the gourd, a piece of fruit is placed. The monkey reaches in, grasps the fruit, and finds that its clenched fist is too large to withdraw through the opening. It is trapped, not by the gourd, not by any lock or chain, but by its own refusal to release what it has grabbed. Freedom is always available, always just one unclenching away. But the grip feels so natural, so necessary, that the monkey cannot imagine letting go. You are not a monkey, and the metaphor has its limits, as all metaphors do, but the mechanism it describes is instantly recognizable. How many of the traps in your life have been maintained not by external forces, but by the tightness of your own grip on outcomes that were never guaranteed? How much of the not enough feeling is generated, not by actual insufficiency, but by the refusal to release a picture of how things should be in order to see how things actually are? Let the hands be open now, the breath finding its own rhythm. Allow the distinction between what is yours and what is not settle into the body like warmth from a fire, quiet and steady, asking nothing in return. Tomorrow the sorting will begin again, as it always does. But tonight, the work is done, and what remains is simply the experience of being here, sufficient, held, released into the generous custody of sleep. Chapter 6. The Stories We Tell Ourselves. Something happened to you once, something real, something with weight and consequence, and then something else happened that was in some ways more significant than the event itself. You told yourself a story about it. You took the raw material of experience, the bare facts of what occurred, and you wove them into a narrative with characters and motivations and a moral at the end, and that narrative became indistinguishable from the thing that actually took place. This is what minds do. This is perhaps the most fundamental thing that minds do, and it is happening so continuously and so automatically that pointing it out feels almost absurd, like pointing out that water is wet. Yet the gap between what happens and the story we tell about what happens is one of the most consequential spaces in a human life, and most of us never think to look at it directly. Consider a simple example. You send a message to someone you care about, and they do not respond. This is the event, the bare fact. A message was sent, a response has not arrived. But the mind cannot leave it there, cannot tolerate the uncertainty of an unexplained gap, and so within minutes or even seconds, a story begins to form. They are upset with you. They have lost interest. You said something wrong the last time you spoke, and now they are pulling away. Perhaps the story goes further, weaving the single unanswered message into a larger pattern of rejection, connecting it to the friend who drifted away in college, to the parent who is emotionally unavailable, to the deep and abiding fear that you are, at your core, the kind of person who gets left behind. All of this unfolds in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. The story constructs itself with breathtaking speed, drawing on decades of accumulated material, and by the time the phone buzzes with an apologetic reply explaining that they were in a meeting, the emotional damage has already been done. You may even find that the relief of the explanation doesn't fully undo the wound, because the story, for the few minutes it lived unchallenged in your mind, felt absolutely true. It didn't feel like an interpretation. It felt like a fact, as solid and as irrefutable as gravity. This is the nature of the stories we tell ourselves, and it has everything to do with the feeling of not enough. Because the not enough feeling is not, at its root, a reflection of reality. It is a story, an interpretation, a narrative constructed from selective evidence and maintained through repetition until it achieves the apparent solidity of established truth. You have taken certain events, certain moments, certain data points from a life that contains millions of data points, and you have arranged them into a coherent tale of insufficiency. The evidence that contradicts the story has been quietly filed away or reinterpreted to fit the existing narrative, because that is what stories do. They are not neutral containers of information, they are active shapers of perception, filtering everything that comes in through the lens of the conclusion they have already reached. Think about the story of your own life as you have been telling it, not the external facts, which are what they are, but the interpretation, the meaning, that thread of significance that you have drawn through the scattered events. Where did you place the emphasis? Which moments did you select as defining, and which did you minimize or forget entirely? If 5 different people were given the same raw material of your life and asked to tell its story, they would produce 5 different narratives, each with its own hero, its own villain, its own theme. The version you carry is one among many possible versions, and it is the one that has been shaped most heavily by the feeling that was already present when the interpretation began. This is not to say that your experience is not real. The feelings are real and the pain is real. Those moments that marked you left genuine marks, and diminishing them in the name of positive thinking or cognitive reframing would be a kind of violence against your own history. What is not real, or rather what is not as fixed as it appears, is the meaning you have attached to those moments. The conclusion that you are not enough is not a fact discovered through careful analysis. It is a lens, ground and polished over years of use, through which everything is subsequently viewed. When you look at your life through this lens, evidence of insufficiency appears everywhere, not because it is everywhere, but because the lens is specifically designed to find it. There is a moment, available to anyone who is willing to look. When the gap between event and story becomes briefly visible, it is a small moment, easily missed, a fraction of a second between something happening and the interpretation clicking into place. In that gap, the world is simply what it is, without the overlay of narrative, without the weight of meaning. The message is simply unanswered. The look on someone's face is simply a look, not a judgment, not a verdict, not a confirmation of your deepest fears. In that gap, there is a strange and quiet freedom, the freedom of not knowing, which the mind finds almost unbearable, but which is, in truth, far closer to reality than any of the stories it constructs to fill the space. You do not need to dismantle every story you have ever told yourself. That would be neither possible nor desirable, because stories are how human beings make meaning, and meaning, even imperfect meaning, is what keeps the existential void from swallowing the whole enterprise. What you can do, lying here in the gentle architecture of this night, is begin to notice the gap. Begin to notice the space between what happens and what you tell yourself about what happens. In that noticing, the stories lose a fraction of their grip. They become, ever so slightly, more transparent, and through their transparency, something simpler and truer begins to be visible. The something truer is almost always more generous than the story. When the narrative of not enough is held up to the light, when you examine it with the curiosity of someone who has just discovered that the lens they have been looking through has a distinct and consistent distortion, what you find is not a corrected narrative but something more interesting. You find that the raw material of your life, stripped of interpretation, does not support any single conclusion as firmly as you believed. It is more ambiguous, more open, more genuinely uncertain than the story allows. There are moments of failure, yes, but there are moments of failure, yes, but there are also moments of stunning adequacy. Moments were always there, they were simply invisible through the old lens. You have probably carried certain stories for so long that they feel less like interpretations and more like the ground you stand on, so fundamental to your sense of self that questioning them seems almost dangerous. The story that you are the one who always has to try harder, the story that love, for you, comes with conditions attached. These narratives have a particular weight, a density that makes them feel permanent, as though they were discovered rather than constructed. But even the oldest, heaviest stories were assembled from specific moments, specific conclusions drawn in specific circumstances by a version of yourself who was younger, more frightened, and working with far less information than the person lying here tonight. What would it be like to hold those old stories with a little more lightness, not dismissing them, not arguing with them, but simply acknowledging that they are stories rather than facts? There is a Buddhist practice of noting, where you simply label what arises in the mind without engaging with it, thinking, you might say when a thought appears, planning, when the mind races ahead. Or simply, story, when the familiar narrative begins its well-worn performance. The noting does not make the story disappear, but it creates a small, precious distance between the teller and the tale, a space where you are no longer fully inside the narrative, but can see it from just slightly outside, the way you can see the frame of a painting if you step back far enough from the wall. Tonight, the stories can rest alongside you without being in charge. They can lie in the bed like old companions, familiar, even cherished in their way, without being given the authority to define the whole of your experience. The story of not enough can be here without being true. It can be acknowledged without being believed. This is a subtle distinction, and it is one that the mind may resist, because the mind has invested heavily in its narratives and does not surrender them casually. But sleep is not the mind's territory. Sleep belongs to a deeper layer of the self, a layer where stories dissolve the way sugar dissolves in warm water, slowly and completely, leaving behind something clear. In that clarity, there are no narratives of sufficient or insufficient, no tales of success or failure, no carefully constructed mythologies about who you are and what your life means. There is just the experience itself, raw, uninterpreted, free from the burden of meaning, and in that freedom there is a rest that goes deeper than the physical, a rest that reaches all the way down to the story-making machinery itself and, for a few blessed hours, allows it to stop. Feel the stories loosening their grip as the body settles deeper into the support beneath it. Feel the gap between event and interpretation widening, just slightly, just enough to let a little more air in. You have been living in a very tightly constructed narrative, and the walls have been so close that they felt like the boundaries of reality itself. But they are not the boundaries of reality itself. But they are not the boundaries of reality. They are the boundaries of a particular story, and stories, however long they have been told, can always be told differently. Not tonight, perhaps. Tonight is not for rewriting. Tonight is not for rewriting. Tonight is for the simple, revolutionary act of noticing that a story is being told and that you, the one who is aware of the story, are larger than any narrative could contain. Rest now in that larger space. Let the stories murmur in the background like a television left on in another room, present but not commanding attention, familiar but not authoritative. The meaning of your life has not been settled. The verdict has not been reached. Everything remains open, beautifully, terrifyingly, mercifully open, and in that openness, sleep finds its easiest entry, slipping through the gap between one story and the next like light through a door left slightly ajar. Chapter 7: The Space Between. Right now, between this breath and the next, there is a pause. It is so brief that you have probably never noticed it, a tiny interval of stillness where the inhale has finished and the exhale has not yet begun. In that pause, nothing is happening. No effort is being made, no task is being performed, no progress is being made. Effort is being made, no progress is being registered on any of the metrics by which you have learned to evaluate your days. It is a gap in the productivity of breathing, a space where the body simply rests in the fullness of having received what it needs before the slow, willing release of the exhale carries it forward again. This small pause contains something enormous, though the mind, trained as it is to value activity over stillness, may not immediately recognize its significance. What it contains is the possibility that rest is not an absence. It is not the empty space between meaningful moments, the dead air between songs, the void that needs to be filled. It is its own kind of presence, its own kind of fullness, as real and as necessary as any action you have ever taken. The pause between breaths is not a failure of the respiratory system. It is a feature of it, built into the rhythm, essential to the whole. You live in a world that has largely forgotten this. The spaces between have been colonized, filled with noise and stimulus and the constant low-level urgency of information arriving from everywhere at once. Even the moments that were once naturally empty, waiting in line, riding in a car, lying in bed before sleep, have been packed with content, with scrolling and listening and the peculiar, restless consumption that passes for engagement in the current age. This space between has become something to be feared, a vacancy that signals waste, a silence that implies something has gone wrong. Busyness has become the default proof of value, and rest has been relegated to the category of things you earn by first exhausting yourself completely. But the body knows better. The body has never subscribed to the cult of constant productivity, and it registers its objections in ways that are easy to ignore but impossible to fully suppress. The headache that arrives by mid-afternoon, the jaw that clenches during what should be a relaxing evening, or that low, persistent hum of anxiety that seems to have no particular cause, because its cause is not any specific threat, but the general absence of space, the relentless filling of every available moment with something that demands attention. These are the body's protests against a life without pauses, and they deserve to be heard with the seriousness they warrant. Consider what rest actually is, not in the productivity framework that defines it as recovery time needed to optimize the next burst of output, but in a more fundamental sense. Rest is the body returning to itself. It is attention withdrawing from the far-flung outposts of worry and planning and self-evaluation and settling back into the immediate, physical reality of being here. It is the nervous system stepping down from its vigilant post and allowing the ancient, restorative processes that run beneath conscious awareness to do their work. None of this requires an excuse. None of this requires prior suffering sufficient to justify the pause. You may have noticed that the permission to rest is one of the hardest permissions to grant yourself. Even now, lying here, there may be a part of you that is calculating the cost, running the numbers on whether you have done enough today to deserve this stillness. That calculation is so familiar that it barely registers as unusual, but consider for a moment how strange it is. The earth does not calculate whether it has earned the right to turn away from the sun. The tide does not evaluate its productivity before withdrawing from the shore. These rhythms of activity and rest, engagement and withdrawal are woven into the fabric of everything that exists, and you are not exempt from them, however much the culture of constant doing might suggest otherwise. There is a concept in music called a rest, notated as a specific symbol in the score, given a precise duration, treated with the same care and intentionality as any note. A piece of music without rests would be noise, a wall of sound without shape or meaning, exhausting to listen to and impossible to parse. The silence between the notes is not where the music stops. It is where the music breathes, where anticipation builds, where the listener's nervous system processes what it has just heard and prepares itself for what comes next. The rest is not the absence of music. It is an integral part of the music, and without it, the notes themselves would lose their meaning. Your life is not so different. The spaces between the doing, the intervals of genuine stillness, are not dead time. They are the places where meaning consolidates, where experience is digested, where the raw data of living is processed into something that can actually be felt and understood rather than merely survived. When these spaces are eliminated, when every moment is filled with activity or stimulation, the result is not a richer life, but a shallower one, a life experienced at speed, where everything happens but nothing quite lands, where you can be endlessly busy and still feel, at the end of the day, that you somehow missed it. Tonight, you are in one of these spaces. The day's activities have concluded, the demands have quieted, and what remains is this gentle interval between waking and sleeping, between doing and not doing, between the person who handles things and the person who simply is. This is not a productive moment by any conventional measure. Nothing is being accomplished here. No goals are being advanced. No metrics are being improved. By the standards that govern most of your waking hours, this moment is empty. And in its emptiness, it might seem to warrant the familiar guilt that rises whenever you stop. But what if the emptiness is the point? What if this space between, this pause in the relentless forward motion, is not a failure of the schedule but the most important part of it? What if the permission you have been waiting for, the permission to stop doing and start simply being, has always been available, and the only thing preventing you from accepting it was the belief that rest must be earned through sufficient suffering first? Feel what happens in the body when you genuinely, fully give yourself permission to be here without justification, not resting in order to be more productive tomorrow, though you will be, not pausing strategically so that the next burst of activity will be more effective, though it will be, just resting because rest is what is happening now, because the body has arrived at this moment and this moment is asking for nothing except presence. There may be a softening somewhere, a place where the muscles have been holding attention so constant that it had become invisible, and now, in the absence of demand, the holding reveals itself by beginning to release. The culture you live in has very little language for this kind of experience. It can describe relaxation as a commodity, something to be purchased through spa treatments and meditation apps and carefully curated experiences. It can describe rest as a strategy, a performance enhancement technique recommended by the same efficiency experts who filled every other moment with obligations. What it struggles to describe is rest as a state of being that is complete in itself, that does not need to point toward anything else, that is not preparation for something and not recovery from something, but simply what it is, simply a space, a pause, a breath held in the lungs for that one extra moment before the exhale begins. You are allowed to be here in this way, without purpose, without justification, free from the nagging sense that you should be using this time more wisely. This is the wisest use of this time. This is the body doing what bodies do when they are given the rare gift of not being asked to do anything else. Every cell is engaged in its own quiet project of restoration, not because you have earned it, but because this is how biology works, automatically, generously, without requiring a performance review first. There is something that happens in the body when the doing stops, something that cannot be rushed or manufactured or achieved through effort, because effort is itself a form of doing, and what is being asked for here is the opposite. It is a kind of settling, like sediment in a glass of water that has been stirred and finally placed on a still surface. The clarity does not arrive through action. It arrives through the cessation of action, through the willingness to let the water be still long enough for the particles to find their way to the bottom. You have been stirred for a long time. The water of your awareness has been cloudy with activity, with demand, with the constant agitation of a life that rarely pauses long enough for anything to settle. Tonight, the glass is on the table, and the settling has begun. Perhaps you can feel it happening already. That gradual clarifying, that slow descent of the day's accumulated turbulence toward a place where it can finally come to rest. This is not something you need to do. It is something you need to allow, which is a very different kind of skill, the skill of getting out of the way, of trusting the process that runs beneath all the doing, the process that knows how to restore what effort has depleted. Let the spaces between grow a little wider now. Let the gap between thoughts lengthen, the way the gap between waves lengthens as the ocean moves toward the calmer hours of the night. You do not need to fill these gaps with anything. You do not need to evaluate them, optimize them, or feel guilty about their existence. They are the rests and the music of your life, the places where the meaning lives, the pauses that give shape to everything around them. In the morning, the music will begin again. The notes will arrive with their familiar urgency, and you will meet them with whatever energy and grace the night has restored. But for now, the rest is playing, the beautiful, deliberate, necessary silence between one movement of the symphony and the next. Let it play. Let it last as long as it needs to last. In the space between doing and doing, in the pause between effort and effort, there is a presence that has been waiting for exactly this moment to make itself known, quiet as the gap between heartbeats, steady as the pause between breaths, patient as the darkness that holds the space between one day and the next. Chapter 8. The Inheritance. Before you were born, the feeling was already waiting. It existed in the tight set of your mother's shoulders when she calculated whether there was enough money for the month, and it lived in the silence your father maintained around certain subjects, a silence that spoke volumes about what he had learned it was safe to want. Further back still, it traveled into the lives of people whose names you may never have known, grandparents and great-grandparents who carried their own versions of the same ache through wars and migrations and economic collapses and the thousand smaller catastrophes that compose a family history. The not enough feeling did not begin with you. It is an inheritance, passed down through generations with the same quiet inevitability as eye color or the shape of a jaw. This is not a comfortable thing to consider because it complicates the story in ways the mind would rather avoid. If the feeling began somewhere in your own experience, if it can be traced to a specific event or a specific failing, then it can, at least theoretically, be addressed, corrected, overcome through sufficient effort or insight. But if it was already present before you took your first breath, if it was woven into the emotional atmosphere of the family you were born into, then the project of fixing it starts to look very different. It becomes less like repairing a broken window and more like recognizing that the entire house was built on a foundation that tilts slightly to one side and that everyone who has ever lived in the house has walked at a slight angle without quite knowing why. The science of how this works is still evolving, but the broad outlines are becoming clearer with each passing decade. Researchers who study the effects of stress across generations have found that significant emotional experiences can leave traces that extend beyond the individual who experienced them. The child of a parent who lived through chronic scarcity, even if that child has never personally known want, may carry a nervous system that is calibrated for scarcity, set to a slightly higher baseline of anxiety, a slightly lower threshold for the fear that there will not be enough. This calibration was not chosen, it was not learned in the conventional sense, through instruction or observation, though those pathways contribute as well. It was, in some fundamental way, passed along like a letter sealed before the recipient was born. Think about your own family for a moment, not with the critical eye of someone looking for blame, but with the softer gaze of someone trying to understand a pattern. What was the emotional weather of the household you grew up in? Not the dramatic events, necessarily, though those matter too, but the baseline atmosphere, the feeling that hung in the air on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Was there ease, or was there a kind of vigilance, a sense that something needed to be managed, monitored, kept from going wrong? Was there laughter that came easily, or did laughter feel like something that needed permission, a break in the tension that could not last too long before the default mood reasserted itself? Whatever that atmosphere was, it was not created from nothing. Your parents absorbed it from their parents, who absorbed it from theirs, each generation passing along not just the explicit lessons of how to live but the implicit ones as well, the emotional postures, the unspoken rules about what was safe to feel, the deep assumptions about whether the world was fundamentally generous or fundamentally stingy. These assumptions do not announce themselves. They operate in the background, like the operating system of a computer, invisible but shaping everything that runs on top of them. Your mother's worry, if she worried, was not simply about the specific things she worried about. It was a channel through which the accumulated worry of her own childhood, her own parents' fears, her own unmetabolized experiences of scarcity or loss, found its way into the present and through her, into you. This is not her fault. She did not choose to pass along the worry any more than she chose the color of the eyes she gave you. She was, in her own way, doing her best with an inheritance she never asked for, carrying a weight that was placed on her shoulders before she was old enough to understand what it was. The same is true for your father, for every adult who shaped the emotional landscape of your early life. They were all inheritors, all carrying the weight of generations, all doing their best to metabolize what had been passed to them while simultaneously passing along whatever they could not fully process. Some managed better than others. Some had the resources, internal or external, to break certain patterns, to absorb certain shocks rather than transmitting them forward. Others were overwhelmed, and the weight passed through them almost unchanged, landing on the next generation with the same density it had carried when it arrived. This understanding is not meant to dissolve responsibility into an endless chain of historical causation where no one is accountable for anything. People make choices, and those choices matter. Parents who cause harm bear responsibility for that harm, regardless of what was done to them in their turn. But beneath the level of individual choice, there is a current running through families that is larger than any single person, a current that carries emotional material from one generation to the next, with a force that individual will alone cannot always redirect. Recognizing this current is not an excuse. It is a form of compassion, both for the people who came before you and for yourself. Because here is what the inheritance means for you. lying here tonight with the weight of not enough pressing on your chest. It means that this feeling is not evidence of your failure, not proof that you have fallen short in some fundamental way. What you carry is, in significant part, the residue of lives you never lived, struggles you never faced, fears that were old before you were young. You have been carrying a weight that accumulated over decades, over generations, and you have been carrying it alone, in the privacy of your own experience, believing it to be exclusively yours. Tonight, that belief can soften. Tonight, the weight can be recognized for what it is, a communal burden, a family heirloom, a package that was left on your doorstep by a delivery chain that stretches back further than memory can reach. There is something strangely liberating about this recognition, not because it removes the feeling, but because it changes the relationship to it. When the not enough sensation arises, it no longer needs to be taken as a personal verdict. It can be seen, instead, as an echo, a reverberation from a chain of lives that each did their best and each fell short in their own particular ways, as all human lives inevitably do. The echo is real, the sensation is real, but the story it seems to tell, the story that says this feeling proves something essential about your inadequacy, begins to lose its authority when you realize that the same feeling has been telling the same story to every link in the chain, each one believing it was uniquely about them. What makes this inheritance particularly difficult to see is that it does not arrive labeled. There is no card attached, no note explaining that this particular anxiety belongs to a grandmother who survived a famine, or that this specific flavor of self-doubt traces its lineage to a grandfather who was told, in no uncertain terms, that he would never amount to anything. The feelings arrive stripped of their history, presenting themselves as purely personal, purely present tense, as though they were born fresh in this moment rather than carried forward from dozens of moments that came before. This is why the not enough feeling seems so stubbornly yours. It wears your clothes, speaks in your voice, and inhabits your body so completely that distinguishing it from the rest of your emotional landscape requires a particular kind of attention, a willingness to wonder whether what you are feeling is entirely your own. You are not the origin of this weight. Rather, you are the latest in a long line of carriers, and the mere fact that you are here, lying in this bed, still breathing, still feeling, still showing up for the difficult business of being human, means that something remarkable has already been done with the inheritance. Survival happened, not transcended it, not conquered it, not performed some heroic act of self-improvement that finally broke the chain. Just survived it, which is, for tonight, absolutely sufficient. Let the weight settle into the bed rather than sitting on your chest alone. The mattress can hold it, and the frame beneath the mattress can hold it too. Below that, the floor supports the frame, the foundation supports the floor, and the earth supports everything, all of it descending in layers of support that were here long before your family's particular version of not enough began its journey through the generations. You are held by a structure that goes deeper than ancestry, deeper than inherited pain, deeper than any story that one generation has ever passed to the next. The inheritance is real, but it is not the whole story. There is also something in you that the chain of not enough could never fully claim, something that has been watching the weight pass from hand to hand across the generations with a steady, patient awareness that belongs to no particular era, no particular family, no particular wound. This awareness has been waiting for someone to notice it. And tonight, in the stillness, it is possible that you are the one who does. Not through effort, not through analysis, but through the simple, quiet act of resting in a space where the inheritance can be felt without being believed, held without being obeyed, acknowledged without being given the final word. Sleep comes for everyone in the lineage the same way, regardless of what they carry. It comes as a kind of forgetting, a temporary dissolution of all the carefully maintained structures of identity and worry and inherited fear. In sleep, the chain of not enough goes slack for a few hours, and what remains is not the absence of the burden, but the presence of something that was always there beneath it, something that no inheritance could corrupt, because it exists in a layer deeper than anything that travels between generations. Let yourself sink toward that layer now. Let the weight of all those lives, all those accumulated fears, rest on the bed beside you rather than inside you. They will be there in the morning, patient as always. But for now, they do not need to be carried. For now, they only need to be gently, lovingly set down. Chapter 9. The Myth of Arrival. There was always going to be a moment when everything clicked into place. You could feel it out there, hovering just beyond the current situation, waiting on the other side of the next accomplishment or the next transition. When you finished school, things would settle. Once you got the job, the real one, the one that matched the vision of the life you were supposed to be living, the restlessness would finally quiet down. When the relationship solidified, when the apartment became a house, when the account balance reached a certain number, when the body achieved a certain shape, when the recognition arrived from the people whose opinions somehow mattered most, then, at last, you would be able to exhale fully and feel the solidity of a life that was complete. You have been chasing this moment for as long as you can remember, though chasing is perhaps too aggressive a word for something that feels more like leaning. You have been leaning toward the future, tilting your weight forward, living just slightly ahead of where you actually are, in the land of when and then and after this. The present moment, whatever it contains, has been treated as a staging area, a waiting room, a temporary condition to be endured until the real thing begins. Somewhere along the way, perhaps so early that you cannot pinpoint the origin, you internalize the belief that arrival is a real place, a destination that exists somewhere in the timeline of your life, and that the feeling of not enough will dissolve the moment your feet touch its shore. This belief is so pervasive, so deeply woven into the fabric of how modern life is organized, that questioning it feels almost unreasonable. The entire architecture of aspiration rests on the assumption that there is a there to get to, a state of having that resolves the state of wanting. Educational systems are built on it, each grade pointing toward the next, each degree a stepping stone to a career that is itself a stepping stone to a retirement that is somehow supposed to be the payoff for decades of forward motion. Advertising is built on it, every product a promise, every purchase a ticket to the version of yourself who finally has what they need. Even the most intimate conversations about happiness tend to be structured around it, organized not as descriptions of what is but as blueprints for what will be, once certain conditions are met. But you have arrived before. You have reached the milestones, or at least some of them, and you know what happened next, because it has happened every time. There was a moment of genuine satisfaction, a flush of warmth, a feeling that the effort had been worth it. Perhaps it lasted an hour, perhaps a week, perhaps, if the achievement was significant enough, a month or two. Then the horizon shifted. The destination that had seemed so solid, so final, revealed itself to be just another point on the line that extended further than expected, and the leaning began again. The goalposts moved, or more accurately, the goalposts were always going to move, because the movement is not a bug in the system. It is the system. Psychologists have a term for this pattern, though giving it a name does not make it less powerful. They call it the hedonic treadmill, the tendency of the human nervous system to return to a baseline level of satisfaction regardless of changes in external circumstances. The metaphor is apt because it captures the essential frustration, the sense of running without arriving, of expending enormous effort while remaining in essentially the same place. But the metaphor also contains its own consolation, because if the treadmill is real, if arrival genuinely does not exist in the way you have been imagining it, then the failure to arrive is not a failure at all. It is the normal functioning of a system that was never designed to deliver permanent satisfaction through achievement. This is difficult news, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. The myth of arrival is not just a belief. It is a source of motivation, a reason to get out of bed, a structure that gives shape and direction to the otherwise overwhelming openness of a human life. To question it feels dangerous, as though pulling on this particular thread might unravel the entire tapestry. If there is no there to get to, then what is the point of all the effort? If achievement does not lead to lasting fulfillment, then why achieve anything at all? These questions arise naturally, and they deserve to be taken seriously, rather than dismissed with platitudes about enjoying the journey. The answer, if there is one, does not come from the mind that asked the question, because that mind is still operating within the framework of arrival, still thinking in terms of destinations and outcomes and the resolution of wanting through having. The answer comes from a quieter place, a place that does not deal in goals or timelines but in the simple, unremarkable fact of being present. Not present as a strategy, not mindful as a technique for optimizing experience, but genuinely, helplessly, inescapably here, in this body, in this bed, in this exact configuration of darkness and warmth and weight and breath. Notice that right now, in this moment, there is nowhere to arrive. The morning is still hours away, and whatever it will bring exists only as a projection, a story the mind tells about a time that has not yet occurred. The day that just ended has already dissolved into memory, its events no longer real in any concrete sense, available only as mental images that the mind can replay but cannot re-enter. What exists, what actually, tangibly, indisputably exists, is this: the body on the bed, the air moving in and out, just the weight of the blanket, and whatever sounds, whatever they are, that fill the room with their quiet testimony to the fact that the world continues to happen while you rest. In this stripped-down, present-tense reality, the myth of arrival loses its power, not because it has been argued away, but because it simply does not apply. There is nowhere to get to from here, because here is not a staging area and now is not a waiting room. They are the only things that are actually real, and in their reality there is a sufficiency that the future can never provide, because the future, by definition, is always somewhere else. This does not mean that ambition is wrong or that planning is foolish or that the desire to grow and improve is somehow a mistake. These impulses are natural expressions of being alive, and they carry their own beauty when they are held lightly, when they arise from fullness rather than from lack. The problem was never the desire to create or to build or to move towards something meaningful. The problem was the belief that the movement itself was evidence of insufficiency, that being on the way meant not yet being worthy, that the gap between here and there was a measure of personal failure rather than simply the distance that movement covers. What if the movement could be enough in itself? The effort, the reaching, that daily act of showing up for a life that never quite matches the blueprint, recognized not as falling short of arrival, but as the whole point of the enterprise. Perhaps the myth of arrival has been obscuring a truth that is simpler and more generous than anything it promised, which is that you were never on your way to somewhere else. You were always already here, doing the difficult, beautiful, exhausting work of being human, and that work is not a prelude to something better. It is the thing itself. Tonight, the treadmill can stop. The horizon can stay where it is, distant and shimmering, without demanding that you lean toward it. Tomorrow the leaning will likely resume, because the habit of arrival is deep and the world provides endless fuel for it. But right now, in the truthful dark, there is nowhere to go and nothing to become. The becoming can rest. The striving can rest. Even the hoping can rest, if it is willing, and in its place something gentler can settle, something that does not need the future in order to be at peace with the present. Feel the body in its horizontal truth, not going anywhere, not climbing toward anything, not positioning itself for the next push forward. The bed is not a launching pad. It is a resting place, and resting places do not require departure plans. They require only the willingness to be in them fully, without one eye on the clock and one foot already out the door. You have been half leaving every place you have ever been, already looking past each present moment toward the arrival that would make it all worthwhile. Tonight, try being fully here, fully in this bed, fully in this bed, fully in this bed, that's not on its way somewhere but is simply, completely, unambiguously here. You have spent so many years leaning toward the next thing that the muscles of anticipation are stronger than the muscles of presence. This is understandable. The world rewards anticipation, rewards planning, rewards the ability to project forward and position yourself for what is coming. But the muscles of presence, underused as they are, have not atrophied. They are here, waiting, just as they have always been waiting, ready to engage the moment you stop leaning and allow your weight to settle fully into the place where you already stand. Tonight, as the body releases its habitual forward tilt into the support of the bed, those muscles of presence can begin to remember what they were made for. The myth of arrival will be waiting in the morning, patient and persuasive, ready to resume its familiar narrative about what you need to do and who you need to become before the real life begins. It is a persistent myth, deeply rooted, and it will take more than one night of rest to loosen its grip completely. But for now, in this interval between one day's striving and the next, the myth has absolutely nothing to work with. There are no achievements to chase in the dark, no destinations to reach between the sheets, no milestones to cross on the way to sleep. There is only the gradual, graceful, entirely sufficient act of letting go, which is not the end of the journey, but the discovery that the journey and the destination were never truly separate to begin with. Chapter 10. The Body Knows. All day long, the body has been talking to you. It has been sending messages through the language it knows best, a language older than words, older than thought, older than the concept of language itself. It spoke through the tension that gathered between the shoulder blades during that difficult conversation and through the heaviness that settled in the chest when you read the news. Even through the sudden lightness that arrived unexpectedly when someone smiled at you in passing, a momentary lift that dissolved as quickly as it appeared but left a trace, a faint warmth like a fingerprint on glass. You may not have heard most of these messages, and that would be entirely understandable. The mind is loud. It fills the foreground of awareness with its plans and worries and evaluations, and the body's quieter communications tend to be drowned out, the way a whispered conversation is lost in a crowded room. Over years, over decades, the habit of living in the head rather than the body becomes so entrenched that many people come to experience their physical selves as little more than a vehicle for the brain, a system of transport and life support that is noticed only when it malfunctions, when pain or illness forces attention downward from the busy skyline of thought into the street-level reality of muscle and bone. But the body is not merely a vehicle. It is a repository of wisdom that the thinking mind, for all its sophistication, cannot replicate. The body knows things that have never passed through the filter of conscious thought, things that were learned before language was available to encode them, things that were absorbed through the skin, through the rhythm of a heartbeat heard from the inside, through the complex chemistry of being held or not held in those earliest months when the world was still more sensation than idea. This is somatic knowledge, knowledge that lives in the cells, woven through the fascia, settled deep in the gut, in the electrical patterns of a nervous system that has been tracking the environment since before birth. The not enough feeling has a body. This is important, and it is easy to overlook. When the sensation of insufficiency arises, it does not arise only as a thought, though the mind quickly translates it into one. It arises first as a physical experience, a constriction somewhere, a hollowness, a kind of bracing that the muscles perform automatically in response to a perceived threat. The threat, in this case, is not a predator or a falling rock. It is the threat of being found wanting, of being exposed as inadequate, of being seen in a way that confirms the worst suspicion about the self. The body responds to this threat as it responds to all threats, by tightening, by guarding, by preparing to fight or flee from something that cannot actually be fought or fled from, because it is an internal experience rather than an external event. Notice, right now, where the body is holding, not where you think it should be holding, or where you have been told that stress commonly accumulates, but where you actually feel the grip. It might be in the jaw, that ancient hinge that clenches during sleep as though trying to hold back words that were never spoken during the day. Perhaps it lives in the hands, curled slightly, maintaining the posture of holding on even when there is nothing present to hold. Or it might be in the belly, drawn inward, contracted against the vulnerability of the soft, unprotected center of the body where the most vital organs do their quiet, essential work. Wherever the holding is, it has information for you. Not the kind of information the mind deals in, not data or analysis or conclusions, but something more like a feeling tone, an emotional weather report from a region of the self that the conscious mind rarely visits. The tight jaw might be holding anger that was swallowed rather than expressed, while the clenched hands might be holding fear that was never acknowledged. Deeper still, the contracted belly might be holding grief that was pushed below the waterline of awareness because there was no safe place and no convenient time to let it surface. You do not need to analyze these sensations tonight. The body's wisdom does not require translation into the mind's language in order to be useful, and the attempt to interpret every physical sensation as a coded psychological message can become its own form of overthinking. What the body is asking for right now is simpler than interpretation. It is asking to be felt, not fixed, not figured out, not optimized, or corrected or stretched into some more acceptable configuration. Just felt, with the same unhurried attention you might bring to listening to a friend who needs to talk but does not need advice. Try this. If it feels right, bring your attention to the top of the head, that subtle crown where the skull meets the open air, and notice whatever is happening there. There might be a sense of pressure or warmth, or nothing in particular. Whatever is present is fine. Now let the attention move slowly downward, like warm oil poured over the scalp, flowing across the forehead, around the eyes, down the cheeks, along the jaw. There is no need to change anything you find. The attention itself is the offering, the simple act of showing up at each region of the body with the message that it is being noticed. As the attention continues its slow descent, through the throat with its delicate vulnerability, across the shoulders with their habitual burden, down through the arms to the hands that have gripped and reached and held and released so many things over the course of a lifetime, something begins to shift. It is not a dramatic shift. It is more like the change that happens when a lamp is brought into a room that has been dark. Not a transformation of the room, but a revelation of what was already there. The body has been carrying its experience all along, faithfully recording every moment, every emotion, every sensation that the mind was too busy or too frightened to acknowledge. Now, with attention present, some of that carried experience begins to release, not because you are forcing it, but because the body has been waiting for exactly this kind of witnessing in order to let go of what it no longer needs to hold. The chest may soften, allowing the breath to deepen into spaces that have been constricted by habitual guarding. Below that, the belly may relax its protective contraction, letting the breath reach all the way down to the pelvic floor, where the most primal sense of support lives. Even the legs may feel heavier, more willing to let gravity do its work, surrendering the readiness to stand and move that has kept them subtly activated even in this horizontal rest. Each of these softenings is the body speaking in its oldest language, saying yes to the invitation to stop holding, stop guarding, stop preparing for a threat that, in this particular moment, is not coming. The body has been trying to tell you something for a long time, and the message is not complicated. It is not a diagnosis or a prescription. It does not require a course of treatment or a 5-step program. The message is simply this: you are here, not in your head, not in your plans, not in the imagined future or the remembered past, but here, in the warm breathing, gravity-held reality of a physical form that has been faithfully carrying you through every moment of your life, asking almost nothing in return except to be noticed from time to time. Tonight, the body can be heard. The volume of the mind's broadcast can be turned down, gently, without force, the way you might lower the lights in a room where someone is trying to rest. In the resulting quiet, the body's communications become more audible, a soft symphony of sensation that has been playing all along beneath the louder music of thought. The heartbeat, steady and unhurried, which has been maintaining its rhythm without your conscious involvement since before you were born. Then the breath, which deepens now that it is no longer competing with the tension of a body braced for evaluation. Even the warmth where skin meets fabric, a boundary that is also a meeting, a place where the inner and the outer world make their gentle contact. There is a particular kind of intelligence that the body possesses, an intelligence that operates without the mind's involvement, and often without its awareness. It is the intelligence that pulls the hand back from a hot surface before the conscious brain has registered the danger, the same intelligence that causes the stomach to clench in the presence of a person who has not yet said anything untrustworthy, but whose energy carries a note of falseness that the body detects and the mind has not yet processed. This same knowing draws you towards certain places and certain people with a pull that cannot be explained rationally, but that, when followed, leads to experiences that the planning mind could never have orchestrated. This intelligence has been available to you every day of your life, running quietly in the background, offering its counsel in the only language it speaks, the language of sensation. When you override this intelligence, which modern life encourages you to do constantly, something important is lost. You lose the feedback loop between experience and response, the animal wisdom that knows when to rest, when to eat, when to withdraw, when to engage, not because a schedule or a productivity system has dictated these things, but because the body itself has read the situation and offered its verdict. The not enough feeling, when it lives only in the mind, becomes an abstract torment, a thought that chases itself in circles. When it is allowed to descend into the body, it becomes something more workable, a sensation with a location, a weight with a texture, a feeling that can be held in the hands of awareness the way you might hold a warm stone. You have been living largely from the neck up, and this is not a criticism but an observation. The culture you inhabit rewards the mind and often ignores the body, and you adapt it accordingly, as anyone would. But the body never stopped knowing what it knows, never stopped speaking its quiet truth, never stopped offering its particular form of intelligence to anyone willing to listen. Tonight, listening is enough. Feeling is enough. Feeling is enough. The simple, animal act of resting in a body that is tired, letting it be tired, letting the tiredness be not a problem to be solved, but an honest report from a faithful companion who has been working hard on your behalf for a very long time. This is the body's version of enough, and it asks nothing more than to be believed. Let the attention rest where it wants to rest now, settling into whatever part of the body feels most like home tonight. There is no wrong answer. Wherever the attention lands, that is where it is needed, and the body will receive it with the gratitude of something that has been waiting a very long time to be visited. In this meeting between awareness and flesh, between the knowing mind and the knowing body, something integrates. Something that was divided remembers its wholeness, and the fragmented experience of a day lived mostly in the head slowly, tenderly, comes back together in the simple, embodied reality of lying down in the dark, breathing, feeling, and letting the body finally have its say. Chapter 11: The Ocean Beneath the Waves. If you have ever stood at the edge of the sea during a storm, you will know the particular quality of chaos that the surface can achieve. Waves pile on waves, white foam tears itself apart against rock and sand, the wind rips spray into the air and scatters it in patterns that no mathematics could predict. Everything is motion, everything is force, everything is noise. The surface of the ocean during a storm is a spectacle of turbulence, so complete that it seems to extend to the very bottom, as though the entire body of water, from surface to floor, were caught in the same violent agitation. But this is not the case. Beneath the storm-tossed surface, at a depth that varies depending on the severity of the disturbance, but that always exists, there is a region of the ocean that the weather cannot reach. Down there, in the cold, dark, pressurized quiet, the water moves slowly, if it moves at all, following currents that have nothing to do with the wind above. Fish that live at those depths are unaware of the storm. The sediment on the floor is undisturbed, and the chemistry of the water follows its own ancient patterns, indifferent to the chaos being performed overhead. Yet the storm is real, undeniably real, but it is also, from the perspective of the deep, a surface phenomenon, an event confined to a relatively thin layer of water that happens to be the layer most visible from the shore. You are, in a sense, an ocean. The metaphor is imperfect, as all metaphors are, but it captures something that is worth capturing tonight. The surface of your experience, the thoughts, the emotions, those worries, the not enough feeling that has been the subject of these hours of reflection, is real and turbulent and sometimes overwhelming. It commands attention the way a storm commands attention, through sheer volume, through the impossibility of looking away, through the way it fills every available space with its noise. On some days, the surface is all you can see, and the turbulence feels like it goes all the way down, as though there were nothing beneath the storm but more storm, chaos layered on chaos with no floor and no calm and no end. But there is a depth in you that the storm has never touched. This is not a metaphor for something you need to create or achieve or develop through practice, though practice can help you find it more readily. It is a description of something that is already here, already present, already doing what it does regardless of whether you are aware of it or not. It is the awareness itself, the simple, open, remarkably stable fact that you are conscious, that experience is happening, that there is a knowing quality to this moment that has been present in every moment of your life, including the most turbulent ones, including the moments when the storm was so fierce that the surface and the deep seemed indistinguishable. Consider your experience right now. There are thoughts moving through the mind, some of them about what is being said, some of them about tomorrow, some of them about the strange drifting quality of consciousness at the edge of sleep. Sensations are present in the body too, the weight of the limbs, the texture of fabric against skin, the subtle rhythm of the heartbeat. Emotions are here as well, perhaps a lingering trace of the day's concerns, perhaps a growing sense of ease, perhaps something less definable, a mood without a name. All of these are the surface, the waves, passing weather of the moment. Now notice what is aware of all of it, not a particular thought, because thoughts are part of the weather, not a particular sensation, because sensations rise and fall. What is aware of the thought about tomorrow and equally aware of the thought about tomorrow, and equally aware of the thought about today, present for the anxiety, and equally present for the calm. Notice what does not change when the emotional weather shifts from one pattern to another, remaining steady, remaining open, remaining precisely itself regardless of what passes through it. This is the ocean beneath the waves, and it does not need the waves to stop in order to exist. This is one of the most important things to understand about it, because the assumption most people carry is that peace lives on the other side of turbulence, that calm can only be accessed after the storm has passed, that the deep can only be reached by first resolving everything that is happening on the surface. But the deep does not wait for the surface to settle. It is already settled, already quiet, already unperturbed, not because it has achieved some state of elevated tranquility, but because perturbation is simply not what it does. Perturbation is what waves do. The ocean itself simply holds them. You have experienced this depth before, even if you did not have words for it at the time. In moments of genuine surprise, when the mind's usual commentary was briefly silenced by something unexpected, there was a split second of pure awareness before the storytelling machinery kicked back in. In moments of absorption, when attention was so fully engaged with something, a piece of music, a sunset, a conversation that reached beneath the usual surface, that the self-conscious narrator took an unscheduled break, you were, for that interval, the depth rather than the surface. These moments tend to be remembered with a particular quality of vividness, not because the content was extraordinary, but because the lens through which they were experienced was temporarily clearer, less cluttered, more directly in contact with what was actually happening. The not enough feeling, which has been the central weather pattern of this exploration, exists at the surface. This is not to minimize it. Surface weather is powerful. Storms sink ships. The not enough feeling has shaped decisions, altered trajectories, kept you up at night, and driven you to exhaustion in the day. Its effects are real, its power is undeniable, and anyone who suggests that you simply need to identify with the depth and the surface will take care of itself is offering spiritual advice that has not been tested against the actual difficulties of a human life. The surface needs attention, care, skillful navigation. The storms need to be weathered, and sometimes that weathering is genuinely hard. What the depth offers is not an escape from the surface, but a ground to stand on while the surface does what it does. When the not enough feeling arises, as it will, as it probably has many times during the course of this night, it arises within something that is itself already complete. The feeling of insufficiency is experienced by a consciousness that lacks nothing, that has never lacked anything, that is, in its essential nature, as whole as the ocean is whole, regardless of how many waves are currently tearing across its face. This is not a thought to be believed, but a reality to be noticed, and the noticing is available right now, in this moment, without any prerequisite other than the willingness to look. You do not need to go anywhere to find this depth, nor do you need to quiet the mind first, though the mind may quiet as a result. There is no requirement to resolve the not enough feeling, or understand its origins, or forgive the people who contributed to it, though all of these are worthy projects for another time. Right now, all you need to do is notice that you are aware, and that this awareness has a quality of stability that the contents of awareness do not share. Thoughts change, feelings change, sensations change. Awareness remains present for all of it, shaped by none of it, as impersonal and as intimate as the darkness that currently fills this room. There is a particular kind of rest that becomes available when the identification shifts, even slightly, from the waves to the water. When you stop trying to manage the surface and instead rest as the ocean that holds it, something in the effort dissolves. The waves can do what they want, the thoughts can come and go. Feelings can shift and swirl. None of it threatens the depth, because the depth is not an alternative to the waves, but their source, their substance, their home. Everything that arises on the surface is made of the same water that constitutes the deep. The turbulence and the calm are not opponents, they are different expressions of the same fundamental reality. Perhaps you have been afraid of the depth, and that fear would make perfect sense. The surface, for all its turbulence, is at least familiar. You know how to navigate it, or at least you have developed strategies for doing so. Strategies that may not work perfectly, but that provide a sense of control, however illusory. The depth is unknown territory, a place where the usual strategies do not apply, where the mind's familiar tools of planning and analyzing and comparing are about as useful as a compass in a place where directions do not exist. To sink toward the depth is, in a certain sense, to let go of everything the mind uses to maintain its sense of self, and the mind, understandably, resists this with everything it has. But you are already sinking, gently, naturally, in the way that the body sinks toward sleep without needing to be told how. The resistance of the mind is itself just another wave, fierce on the surface but unable to penetrate the calm below. You do not need to overcome the resistance. You simply need to notice that it is happening at the surface while the depth remains, as always, undisturbed. The sinking happens not through effort, but through the gradual relaxation of the effort that has been keeping you afloat in the turbulence, the effort of maintaining the surface identity, the surface worries, the surface conviction that the waves are all there is. Let the waves continue, if they are continuing, and let the thoughts drift through without requiring them to stop or change direction. Allow the not enough feeling be present, if it is present, without treating it as evidence of a problem. From the depth, from the ocean beneath the waves, all of it is simply weather, and weather, however dramatic, is always temporary. What is not temporary, what has been here since the beginning and will be here at the end, is the simple, open, undamaged awareness in which the weather occurs. Rest now in that awareness, not as something you do, but as something you are, not as an achievement, but as a recognition. The ocean does not try to be deep. It simply is deep, inherently, constitutionally, regardless of what happens on its surface. In the same way, you do not need to try to be aware. Awareness is your nature, as native to you as wetness is to water, and tonight, in the generous dark, it is possible to stop swimming against the waves and simply float, held by a depth that has never, for even one moment, been not enough. Chapter 12: The Gift of Darkness. For most of human history, night was absolute. When the sun went down, the world did not simply dim, it disappeared, retreating into a darkness so complete that a hand held at arm's length was invisible, that the difference between open eyes and closed eyes was, for all practical purposes, nothing. Stars provided what they could, the moon offered its intermittent assistance, and fire carved small, flickering rooms of light out of the vast dark. Beyond those rooms, the world became unknown, a territory governed by senses other than sight, where the ear and the nose and the skin took over the work of navigating a reality that the eyes could no longer map. We have lost this darkness, or rather, we have pushed it to the margins, replaced it with the constant low-level glow of a civilization that never fully sleeps. There is light leaking through curtains from street lamps, light emanating from the small screens we carry to bed, light from the standby indicators of devices that watch the room with their tiny, patient eyes. The darkness that your ancestors knew, the darkness that shaped the human body and its rhythms over hundreds of thousands of years, has become something you have to seek out deliberately, traveling to remote places far from the reach of electrical infrastructure, in order to experience what was once the default condition of every night. This matters more than it might seem, because darkness is not merely the absence of light. It is a biological signal, as real and as specific as any hormone or neurotransmitter, that triggers a cascade of restorative processes in the body. When the eyes register the declining light of evening, a message travels from the retina to a small cluster of cells deep in the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which functions as the body's master clock. This clock, receiving the signal that darkness is approaching, initiates the production of melatonin, a molecule that does not merely make you sleepy, but fundamentally alters the body's operating mode, shifting it from the metabolic patterns of daytime activity to the repair-oriented patterns of rest. What happens next, once sleep takes hold, is extraordinary. The brain, which has been accumulating metabolic waste throughout the day, the chemical byproducts of 16 or more hours of continuous thought and perception and emotion, activates a cleaning system that operates almost exclusively during sleep. This system, sometimes called the glymphatic system, works by expanding the spaces between brain cells and flushing cerebrospinal fluid through the tissue, carrying away the accumulated debris the way a slow, thorough rain washes the streets of a city after a long dry spell. Without this nightly cleaning, the waste builds up, clouding cognition, dulling emotional regulation, creating the foggy, fragile quality of a mind that has been denied its maintenance cycle. Meanwhile, in other regions of the brain, the day's experiences are being sorted, consolidated, and filed. The hippocampus, which has been collecting memories in their raw, unprocessed form throughout the waking hours, begins transferring them to the cortex, where they are integrated with existing knowledge, woven into the larger tapestry of understanding that constitutes your accumulated wisdom. This process is not random. It is selective, guided by emotional significance and personal relevance, strengthening memories that matter and allowing others to fade. Dreams appear to play a role in this process, providing a kind of simulated environment in which the brain can test new connections, rehearse unfamiliar situations, and process emotional material that was too hot or too complex to handle during waking hours. The body, too, is engaged in its own program of restoration. Growth hormone, released in its largest pulses during the deepest stages of sleep, stimulates the repair of tissues, the strengthening of the immune system, the maintenance of the complex infrastructure that keeps a human organism functioning. Muscles that were strained during the day receive their molecular repair kits. The cardiovascular system, released from the demands of active circulation, drops into a lower gear, allowing blood pressure to fall, the heart rate to slow, the entire system to recuperate from the relentless demands of keeping a body alive and moving in a world that requires constant physical effort, even when that effort is as simple as sitting upright in a chair. All of this is happening right now, or it is about to happen, as the body moves toward the threshold of sleep. Every one of these processes is a gift, and it is a gift that darkness makes possible. Not the darkness of despair, not the metaphorical darkness of difficulty or suffering, but the literal, physical darkness of night, the absence of light that the body was built to receive as a signal of safety, of cessation, of the ancient permission to stop. You did not have to earn this gift. This is worth stating, because the mind may try to insert itself into the process, evaluating whether the day's efforts were sufficient to justify the body's rest, running its familiar calculations about deserving and worth. But the body does not operate on a merit system. The glymphatic system does not check your productivity metrics before flushing the waste from your brain. Growth hormone does not consult your achievement record before initiating tissue repair. These processes are unconditional, as automatic and as generous as the darkness itself, and they will proceed with the same thoroughness whether the day that preceded them was triumphant or disastrous, productive or fallow, everything you hoped for or nothing at all. There is something profoundly humbling about this. The most important maintenance your body requires happens while you are unconscious, in a state where you have no control, no influence, no ability to manage or optimize the outcome. The ego, which spends the waking hours convinced of its indispensability, is entirely absent during the hours when the most essential work of restoration is being performed. Sleep is, in this sense, a nightly demonstration of a truth the ego would prefer not to face, which is that the deepest forms of healing do not require your active participation. They require only your willingness to get out of the way. The darkness around you right now is not empty. It is full of activity, though the activity is of a kind that consciousness cannot observe directly. In the cells, throughout the tissues, across the neural networks that are even now preparing for their nightly reorganization, something extraordinary is underway, something that has been underway every night of your life, something that has been underway every night of your life, something that will continue long after the worries of this particular day have faded into the vast, forgiving archive of the past. This is the gift of darkness, not as a metaphor but as a biological reality, a nightly miracle of restoration that asks nothing of you except the willingness to close your eyes and trust that the body knows what to do when the light goes away. Consider for a moment the profound trust that sleep requires. In order to receive the gift of darkness fully, you must relinquish consciousness, which means relinquishing control, which means allowing yourself to become, for several hours, entirely vulnerable. Every other animal that sleeps, and nearly all of them do, makes this same bargain, trading awareness for restoration, trading vigilance for repair. The fact that evolution maintained this arrangement, that millions of years of competitive pressure did not eliminate the need for this period of vulnerability, tells you something important about how essential the process is. Whatever sleep does, it does something so valuable that the risk of being unconscious for a third of every day was worth taking, again and again, across every branch of the animal kingdom. You are being asked to take that same risk tonight, and your body is ready for it. The racing of the mind, if the mind is still racing, is not evidence that the body is not ready. It is evidence that the mind has not yet caught up with what the body already knows, which is that the day is done, the work is done, the holding on can stop. The mind's reluctance to release its grip on consciousness is understandable because the mind identifies with the grip, experiences itself as the grip, and letting go feels, from the mind's perspective, dangerously close to ceasing to exist. But the mind does not cease to exist in sleep. It simply changes form, descending into the dream-rich, image-thick landscape of the unconscious, where it continues to process, to create, to play, freed from the constraints of logic and linearity that govern its waking hours. The night is not your enemy. It is not a void to be feared or a gap to be endured. It is a workshop, a laboratory, a place of active, intricate, devoted care, and you are both its subject and its beneficiary. Every cell in your body has been waiting for this. Every system has been preparing for the shift from the expenditure of day to the replenishment of night, and the shift is happening now, smoothly, automatically, with a competence that makes the mind's clumsy attempts at self-improvement look like a child building a sand castle next to the ocean's vast engineering. Sleep, when it comes, will take you through stages that the conscious mind can neither observe nor control. There will be the light sleep of the transition where the body begins to disconnect from the waking world, the muscles twitching as they release their daytime holdings, the mind producing the strange, fragmentary images called hypnagogia that belong to neither waking nor dreaming, but to the borderland between. Then the descent will deepen, moving through the progressively slower brainwave patterns of stage 2 and stage 3, until the deepest sleep is reached. The slow-wave sleep where the most critical restoration occurs, where growth hormone floods the system, where the brain's cleaning mechanisms operate at their highest efficiency. Later, the brain will rise back toward the surface and enter the strange vivid territory of REM sleep, where the eyes move rapidly behind closed lids and the body is temporarily paralyzed, a safety mechanism that prevents the dreaming mind from acting out its fantasies in the physical world. In this state, the emotional processing that the waking mind could not complete is carried forward, the difficult feelings replayed in symbolic form, their edges softened, their intensity modulated, so that the sleeper can wake to find that what felt overwhelming the night before has become, somehow, more manageable. Let the darkness do its work. Let the eyes close if they have not already, and let the visual world dissolve into the rich, warm nothing that is the body's preferred environment for its deepest healing. The last traces of light, whether from a window or a device or the fading afterimage of the day, can release their hold on the attention now. What comes in their place is not absence but presence, the presence of a darkness that is alive with purpose, that is filled with the quiet, devoted labor of a body taking care of itself with the same fierce tenderness that it has brought to every night since the first night, when the first human eyes closed against the first absolute dark and the ancient machinery of rest began its work for the very first time. Knots, Chapter 13. the permission you have been waiting for. Somewhere inside you, there is a gatekeeper. This gatekeeper stands at the threshold between effort and ease, between doing and resting, and it has been standing there for a very long time. Its job, as it understands it, is simple. It decides when you have done enough to deserve what comes next. It tallies the hours worked, the tasks completed, the obligations fulfilled, the contributions made, and it compares the total against a standard that it keeps locked away where you cannot examine it too closely. Only when the total meets the standard does the gatekeeper step aside, and the truth is that the total has almost never met the standard, because the standard was designed, whether by the gatekeeper or by whoever installed it, to remain perpetually out of reach. You know this gatekeeper intimately, even if you have never called it by that name. You feel its presence every time you consider stopping before the work is done, every time you think about resting before the list is complete, every time the body says enough and the mind overrules it with one more, just a little more. Not yet. The gatekeeper's authority feels absolute, feels as though it were written into the operating system of the self so deeply that questioning it would be like questioning the need to breathe. Rest must be earned, the gatekeeper says. Sleep must be preceded by sufficient effort. Ease must be justified by prior difficulty. These are not suggestions, they are laws, and you have been obeying them for so long that disobedience feels not just wrong but impossible. But notice where these laws came from. They did not arrive from the body, which has its own clear and non-negotiable requirements for rest that have nothing to do with productivity or merit. Nor did they arrive from the natural world, where animals sleep when they are tired without consulting an inner tribunal about whether their hunting was sufficiently successful to warrant the indulgence. Instead, they arrived from a particular culture at a particular moment in history, a culture that discovered, somewhere in the machinery of industrialization, that human beings could be made to produce more if rest were treated not as a right, but as a reward, not as a biological necessity, but as a luxury that must be purchased through labor. This cultural conditioning is deep, and it would be naive to suggest that a few words spoken into the darkness could undo it entirely. But words can do something. They can name what has been unnamed, can point to the gatekeeper and say, "There, that is what has been standing between me and the rest I need." The naming does not dissolve the conditioning, but it introduces a hairline crack in its authority, a space through which something gentler might eventually flow. So, here is what the gatekeeper does not want you to know, what it has been working to obscure for as long as it has held its post. You do not need permission to rest. Not from the gatekeeper, not from the culture that installed it, not from the boss or the family or the inner critic or the voice that says the house is not clean enough, the inbox is not empty enough, the body is not disciplined enough, the life is not impressive enough to justify lying down and closing your eyes. The permission has been yours all along, embedded in the biology, written into the architecture of a body that was never designed to run without stopping, that was built with rest as a core feature rather than an optional upgrade. Think about what it would feel like to receive this permission fully, not as an idea but as a physical experience, not to believe that rest is allowed, which is an intellectual exercise, but to feel it in the body, to feel the muscles relax around the knowledge that nothing more is required of you tonight. There might be resistance. The gatekeeper might protest, offering its familiar arguments about all the things that remain undone, all the ways the day fell short, all the reasons this particular rest has not been adequately earned. Let it protest. Its protests are the echoes of a system that is losing its grip, the last arguments of an authority that derives its power not from truth but from habit. The things that remain undone will still be there in the morning. This is the gatekeeper's strongest argument and also its weakest, because it is true and also irrelevant. The undone things will be there whether you rest or not. The question is not whether they will wait, but whether you will arrive at them tomorrow. depleted or restored, whether you will meet the demands of another day with the frayed remnants of a body denied its rest, or with the renewed resources of a body that was allowed, fully and without reservation, to do what bodies do in the dark. Permission is a strange thing. In its deepest sense, it is not something that can be given by another person, because the authority to grant it already resides within the one who seeks it. The child who asks a parent for permission to play is not asking for a capability they lack. They are asking for the removal of an external restriction. But the restriction you carry around, rest, is not external. It lives inside, in the gatekeeper's posture, in the clenched jaw that says not yet, in the mind that continues to churn through its lists even as the body pleads for stillness. The permission you need is the permission to override this internal restriction, to step past the gatekeeper with the quiet, firm authority of someone who has recognized that the gate was never locked. Consider the absurdity that has been so normalized it no longer registers as absurd. You would never tell a plant that it had not photosynthesized enough to deserve water. You would never tell a fire that it had not burned brightly enough to deserve oxygen. These are needs, not rewards, and the idea of attaching moral conditions to them would strike anyone as nonsensical. Yet this is precisely what has been done with rest, this fundamental biological requirement that every organism on the planet fulfills without the slightest hesitation, without the slightest guilt, without the slightest sense that it must first prove its worthiness. Only humans have managed to turn a biological imperative into a moral achievement, and the cost of this confusion is measured in the exhaustion that has become so widespread it is now considered normal. You have been waiting for someone to tell you it is okay. Perhaps you have been waiting your whole life, waiting for a voice with sufficient authority to say the words that would release the clench, that would allow the shoulders to drop and the breath to deepen, and the whole exhausted machinery of doing to finally power down. Here, then, is that voice, not because it carries any special authority, but because you are ready to hear it, because the night has been slowly preparing you for this moment, layer by layer, reflection by reflection, and you have arrived at the place where the words can land. It is okay to rest, okay to stop, okay to set down the burden of being productive, of being useful, of being enough by the gatekeeper's impossible standards, and to simply lie here in the dark with nothing to show for this moment except the fact of your own breathing. This is not laziness, not failure, not the abandonment of your responsibilities, or the betrayal of your ambitions. What is happening here is simply a body doing what it was made to do, and a mind finally allowing it. The gatekeeper may remain at its post. Old structures do not dissolve overnight, and the conditioning that taught you to earn your rest was installed by powerful forces over a long period of time. But tonight, you can walk past it. Tonight, you can feel its presence without obeying its commands. The way you might feel the pull of an old habit without following it into its familiar groove. The gate is open. It has always been open. It has always been. The gatekeeper's power was never in the gate itself, but in your belief that it was locked, and that belief, tested against the reality of this moment, does not hold. Feel what opens in the body when the permission is received. There may be a wave of something, relief or sadness, or a combination of the two that does not have a clean name. The sadness, if it comes, might be for all the nights you did not give yourself this permission, all the hours you pushed past the body's clear signals because the gatekeeper said the tally was not yet sufficient. Let that sadness be here too. It belongs in this moment just as much as the relief, and it does not need to be resolved. It only needs to be felt, acknowledged, held with the same gentleness that is being extended to everything else that has surfaced during these hours of quiet reflection. You have permission to rest, permission to sleep, permission to let the mind stop its calculations and the body stop its striving and the gatekeeper stop its vigilant, exhausting patrol of the border between effort and ease. Tomorrow will ask what it asks. Tonight asks nothing except this. Close the eyes if they are still open. Let the breath find its own depth. Let the muscles release their final holdings, those last subtle tensions that have been maintained out of sheer habit, the body's way of saying, I am still here, still ready, still on duty. You are off duty now. The night shift belongs to the body's own restorative intelligence, which does not need your help, your management, or your approval in order to do its work. There is a particular quality of silence that arrives when the permission is fully received, a silence that is not empty but full, saturated with the kind of peace that comes not from having resolved everything but from having set everything down. It is the silence of a room after the last guest has left, not lonely but spacious, not bereft but relieved. In this silence, the body can do what it has been wanting to do all day, which is simply to be a body, without agenda, without performance, free from the constant overlay of evaluation that turns every heartbeat into a test and every breath into an opportunity for judgment. Rest now, not because the list is done, not because the standard has been met, not because the gatekeeper has finally stepped aside in satisfaction, simply because rest is what is needed, and what is needed does not require justification, because the body is asking for it in the only language the body speaks, and because you are human, and humans rest, and this simple fact has been true since long before anyone thought to attach conditions to it. The permission was always yours. Tonight, at last, it is being claimed. Chapter 14: The River and the Rest. There is a quality of movement that water knows instinctively, a way of finding the path of least resistance that is neither passive nor aggressive, but something else entirely, something for which human language has only approximate words. A river does not force its way through stone. It does not push against the landscape in frustration, demanding that the terrain conform to its preferred route. Neither does it lie still, waiting for conditions to improve, gathering its molecules into a stagnant pool of potential that never becomes kinetic. It moves and flows, finding the low places, follows the contours, adjusts to every obstacle with a responsiveness so complete that the obstacle itself becomes part of the path, incorporated into the flow rather than opposing it. You have been trying to force the river. This is not a criticism but an observation, offered with the same quiet neutrality as the observation that water is wet or that gravity pulls downward. For most of your waking life, you have been applying force to the current of experience, pushing it in directions it did not naturally want to go, damming it when it threatened to flow somewhere inconvenient, trying to control the volume and velocity and destination of something that, by its very nature, cannot be controlled. The effort has been enormous, and the results have been mixed at best, because the river does not respond well to force. It responds to it the way all natural systems respond to force, by building pressure behind the dam until the dam breaks, by finding alternative routes around the obstruction, by doing whatever it needs to do to resume its natural flow. The not enough feeling is, in part, the sensation of forcing the river. It is the exhaustion of pushing against the current of your own life, the weariness of insisting that things should be different from how they are, that you should be different from who you are, that the flow should be faster, stronger, smoother, more productive, more perceptive, more preledy directed towards some predetermined destination. This forcing is so habitual, so deeply ingrained in the way you approach the business of being alive, that it feels normal. It feels like effort, like discipline, like the responsible way to conduct a life. But underneath the veneer of responsibility, there is a kind of violence in it, a subtle war against the natural rhythm of things, and the body, which is made mostly of water and therefore understands flow at a molecular level, has been registering the cost of this war in every tense muscle and sleepless night. What would it mean to stop forcing? Not to stop moving, because the river never stops moving, but to stop insisting that the movement conform to a plan that was drawn up without consulting the terrain. What would it feel like to let the current carry you for a while? To trust that it knows where it is going even when you do not, to allow the path to reveal itself through the act of flowing rather than attempting to engineer it in advance. This is not passivity. The river is the least passive thing in nature. It carves canyons, moves mountains, reshapes continents over time. But it does all of this without strain, without the clenched jaw determination that characterizes so much of human effort. It does it through persistence, through the patient, tireless application of its own nature to the landscape it encounters. Tonight, as the body settles towards sleep, there is an opportunity to experience what flow feels like in the absence of force. The breath is already demonstrating it, moving in and out without your direction, following a rhythm that was not planned but that is perfectly suited to this moment, this body, this particular configuration of needs. The heartbeat is demonstrating it, maintaining its pace without your consultation, adjusting to the body's requirements with a sensitivity that the conscious mind could never replicate. Even the thoughts, which have been the most resistant to flow, the most insistent on maintaining their grip, are beginning to loosen, to drift, to move with the current rather than against it, as the edge of sleep draws closer and the mind's hold on its own activity starts to soften. Consider the way a river approaches the sea. Miles from the coast, the current is still vigorous, the water still tumbling over rocks, still carving its path with the confident energy of something that knows it is going somewhere. But as the river widens and the gradient softens, the urgency begins to fade. The banks grow further apart. The water slows, deepens, begins to spread laterally across floodplains where herons stand in patient contemplation and the surface barely seems to move. This is not the river losing its purpose. It is the river completing its purpose, transforming from the focused intensity of the mountain stream into the wide, generous calm of something that is almost where it was always going. You are in the wide part of the river now. The urgency of the day, the tumbling, rock-strewn energy of everything that needed to be done has given way to the slower, deeper movement. Now the banks are far apart and the current is gentle. There is no need to navigate because the water knows where it is going, and where it is going is the same place every river has always gone, toward the vast, receiving stillness that waits at the end of every day. There is a place where the river meets the stillness, and that place is where sleep begins. It is not a dramatic border, not a cliff edge over which consciousness tumbles into the void. It is more like an estuary, a gradual mingling of movement and rest, where the fresh water of waking thought slowly mixes with the salt water of the unconscious, and the boundary between the two becomes impossible to locate. You have been moving toward this estuary all night, carried by the current of these words, by the gradual deepening of the body's relaxation, by the slow unwinding of the not enough feeling that has been running like a thread through every chapter. Feel the current now, the gentle, insistent pull toward rest that has been building since the body first made contact with the bed. It is not a force that needs to be obeyed so much as a direction that can be yielded to, a flow that can be joined. The mind may still be producing thoughts, plans for tomorrow, fragments of concern, residual flickers of the day's emotional weather. These are the last ripples on the surface of the river before it enters the calm, wide waters of the estuary, and they do not need to be stilled through effort. They will still themselves, given time, given space, given the permission to be carried along by the current rather than standing against it. You have been swimming upstream for a very long time, not in every area of life, perhaps, but in the area that matters most right now, the area of rest, of surrender, of allowing the body to do what it was designed to do without the mind's constant commentary about whether the surrender is happening correctly, efficiently, productively. The upstream swimming has been exhausting, and the exhaustion is part of why the not enough feeling has such a persistent grip. When all of the energy is going into fighting the current, there is nothing left over for the simple enjoyment of being alive, for the basic animal pleasure of lying in a warm, safe place and letting the day dissolve into the darkness. The Taoist concept of we which is sometimes translated as non-action and sometimes as effortless action, captures something of what the river demonstrates. It is not doing nothing. The river is ceaselessly active, ceaselessly in motion, ceaselessly engaged with the landscape it traverses. What it is not doing is fighting. What it is not doing is spending its energy in opposition to the reality it encounters. It meets the rock and moves around it, encounters the valley and fills it. When it arrives at the cliff, it falls, without hesitation, without fear, unburdened by the tightened muscles of resistance that would characterize a human being in the same position. This is not because the river is brave. It is because the river does not have a self-image to protect, does not carry a story about how it should flow, does not compare its current to other rivers and find it wanting. You cannot be a river, not entirely, because being human means carrying exactly the kind of self-awareness that makes flow difficult. You can think about your own flowing, judge it, compare it, worry that it is not flowing enough or flowing in the wrong direction. This recursive quality of consciousness is both the great gift and the great burden of being human, the source of art and philosophy and love, and also the source of the not enough feeling that has been the companion of every chapter in this night's journey. But you can, in this moment, recognize when the fighting is happening and choose, gently, to let it go. Stop swimming, not as a dramatic gesture of surrender, not as a spiritual achievement to be congratulated, but as the simplest, most natural thing in the world, the way an exhausted swimmer stops fighting and discovers, with mild surprise, that the water holds them up. The water has always been holding you up, and the current has always been flowing in the direction of rest. All that effort of fighting it was never necessary, never productive, never anything other than the habitual response of a mind that believed it had to earn every moment of ease through an equivalent moment of struggle. The river continues. The river will carry you through the hours of the night with the same patient, unhurried attention it brings to carrying a leaf, a stone, a grain of sand. It does not discriminate between burdens or evaluate its cargo, but simply flows, and everything in it flows with it, moving toward the sea, which is the deepest rest, the most complete release, the place where individual rivers lose their names and merge into something so vast that the concept of not enough becomes, quite literally, unthinkable. Feel the flow now, feel the way the body is being carried rather than carrying, the way the breath is happening rather than being done, the way the thoughts are floating rather than being held. This is not something you are achieving. It is something you are achieving. It is something you are allowing, which is the hardest thing for the forcing mind to accept and also the simplest. The river asks nothing of you except that you stop resisting it. The rest is not a reward for the resistance finally ending. It is what was always there, beneath the resistance, waiting with the patience of water for the moment when the fight went out of the swimmer and the current could, at last, do its gentle, ancient work. Let yourself be carried and let the night take over. Allow the river to know its own way, which it has known since long before you were born and will know long after, patient and persistent, finding the low places, following the contours, moving always toward the wide, still water where all rivers come to rest. Chapter 15, Home. You are here, after everything, after all the words and all the reflection and all the slow, patient work of turning toward what is difficult and sitting with it in the dark. This is what remains. You are here, Wirt, not the you of the job title or the social role, not the you that the measuring mind has been trying to quantify all your life, not the you that the hungry ghost has been trying to feed or the inner critic has been trying to correct. Just you, in the simplest, most irreducible sense of the word, the you that was here before the story started and that will be here after they end, lying in a bed, breathing, warm, held by gravity and darkness and the quiet, steady fact of your own existence. This is what home means, though the word has been co-opted by so many other meanings that its simplest one tends to get lost. Home is not a place you arrive at after years of self-improvement. It is not a state you achieve after finally becoming enough. It is not the house you grew up in, unless it is, and it is not the house you live in now, unless it is that too. Home, in its deepest sense, is the experience of being where you are without wanting to be somewhere else, the experience of inhabiting your own life without the constant, restless sense that the real life is happening in another room, behind a door you have not yet found the key to. You have been searching for this home for a long time, looking for it in accomplishments and relationships and possessions and the approval of people whose approval seem to matter more than your own. Each of these held a promise of homecoming, a suggestion that if you could just get this one thing right, you would finally feel the settling, the deep exhale, the sense of having arrived at the place where the searching could stop. Some of them delivered on that promise for a while, creating temporary shelters of enough that felt solid until the weather changed and the walls proved thinner than they looked. Others never delivered at all, and the disappointment of their failure added another layer to the conviction that home was somewhere else, always somewhere else, a destination that receded with every step taken toward it. But here you are, not somewhere else, here in this specific body, on this specific night, in this particular configuration of blanket and pillow and darkness that will never be exactly replicated. The searching has brought you full circle, not to a destination but to a starting point, not to the answer you were looking for but to the realization that the question may have been wrong all along. It was never where is home, but rather what is preventing me from recognizing that I am already in it. The not enough feeling has been the primary obstruction, and you have spent these hours examining it from many angles, turning it over, holding it up to the light, tracing its origins, questioning its authority. You have met the hungry ghost and the measuring mind, opened the door to the shadow, considered what lies within your control and what does not. Along the way, you looked at the stories told about yourself, the spaces between activity, the inheritance passed down through generations. Each exploration questioned the myth of arrival, listened to the body's wisdom, felt the ocean beneath the waves, received the gift of darkness, and offered the permission that was always yours to give. Each of these explorations was a way of loosening the grip of the not enough feeling, not to eliminate it because it may never fully disappear, but to create enough space around it that something else can be seen. That something else is this moment, this breath, this quiet, unremarkable, absolutely extraordinary fact of being alive and aware and present in a world that did not have to include you but does. The not enough feeling says that this is not sufficient, that bare existence is a starting point rather than an achievement, that being here is the minimum rather than the miracle. But the not enough feeling has been wrong about many things over the course of these chapters, and it is wrong about this most of all. Being here is the whole thing, not the prelude to the thing, not the warm-up act, not the mundane backdrop against which the real events of life occasionally appear. Being here in this body, on this earth, for this brief and unrepeatable stretch of time, is the event. Everything else, the careers, the relationships, every accomplishment, the failures, the moments of ecstasy, and the long stretches of ordinary Tuesday afternoons, is the decoration on a cake that was already complete before the first candle was placed. This does not mean that the decorations do not matter. They matter enormously, and the life you are living, with all its specific textures and challenges and joys, is worth every ounce of attention and care you bring to it. What it means is that the cake was never dependent on the decorations for its completeness. You were never dependent on the achievements for your worthiness. The worthiness was there from the beginning, baked in, if you will forgive the extension of the metaphor, as fundamental to your existence as the atoms that compose your body. Feel, if you can, what it is like to come home to this understanding, not as a thought, not as a belief to be maintained through effort, but as a physical sensation, a settling, a landing. The body has been preparing for this landing all night, releasing its tensions layer by layer, softening its defenses, opening its grip. Now, at the end of the journey, there is nothing left to release except the last, subtle holding that separates you from the full experience of being exactly where you are. Let that holding dissolve now, not through force, but through the recognition that it is no longer needed. You are not going anywhere. There is nowhere else to go. The searching is over, not because the destination has been reached, but because the distinction between the searching and the destination has finally, quietly, ceased to mean anything at all. The breath is here. Feel it, not as an exercise, not as a technique, but as the most intimate companion you have ever had, the one that has been with you since the first moment and will be with you until the last, the one that has never left, never judged, never measured, never found you wanting. The breath does not know about not enough. It knows only about this moment, this exchange, this quiet giving and receiving that constitutes the most basic conversation between a body and its world. The heartbeat is here. Feel that too if you can. The steady rhythm that has been keeping time since before you were born, that kept time through every triumph and every failure, that never sped up in judgment or slowed down in disappointment. It has been the most faithful thing in your life, more faithful than any other presence, maintaining its rhythm through every storm, every calm, every moment when the not enough feeling was at its most convincing. The heartbeat never believed it, just kept beating, which is to say, just kept bringing you home. Now the whole of this night has been a kind of coming home, though each chapter arrived through a different door. You came home through the recognition of the hungry ghost, understanding that the wanting was not a personal failing but a universal condition. Through the measuring mind, you saw that the ruler was never going to produce a final, satisfactory sum. Through the shadow, you welcomed back the parts of yourself that had been exiled, and through the release of what was never yours to control, through the questioning of stories, through the honoring of the spaces between, through the acknowledgement of the inheritance, through the dismantling of the inheritance, through the dismantling of the inheritance, through the dismantling of the myth of arrival. Each door opened onto the same room, this room, this room, this darkness, this breath, this moment of absolute ordinariness that what quiet. Sleep is very close now. You can feel its proximity in the heaviness of the eyelids, in the drift of the thoughts, in the way the edges of awareness have become soft, blurred, permeable. The boundary between waking and sleeping is dissolving in the same way that all the other boundaries have been dissolving tonight, gently, without drama, through the simple process of paying attention to what is actually here rather than what the mind insists should be here instead. When sleep comes, let it come as a homecoming, not as an escape, not as a retreat, not as a temporary reprieve from the not enough feeling that will be waiting at the door when morning arrives. Let it come as a return to the most fundamental truth about who you are, which is that you are a living being in a living world, held by forces that do not ask for your resume before they agree to hold you. Gravity does not check your credentials. The air does not audit your productivity. The darkness that wraps around you now does so with the same indiscriminate tenderness it extends to everything, to the trees outside the window and the stones in the garden and the small creatures who are also, right now, finding their way toward rest. You are one of those creatures. Beneath the complexity, beneath the self-consciousness, beneath the layers of culture and conditioning and the elaborate architecture of the not enough feeling, you are a living being preparing for sleep, which is the most ancient, the most universal, the most deeply ordinary act that any creature performs. There is nothing to prove in this act, nothing to earn, only the yielding, the softening, a slow dissolution of the boundary between the self that has been working so hard all day and the rest that has been waiting, patient as darkness, faithful as gravity, generous as air. You are home. You have always been home. The searching was a dream, vivid and convincing, but ultimately dissolving in the light of what was always already here. Let the dream continue its dissolving, and let the day's accumulated weight settle into the bed, into the earth, into the vast, untroubled ground that has been holding everything since before holding had a name. Allow the eyes to close for the last time tonight, and behind them, in the warm, private darkness of a body at rest, let the simplest truth of all repeat itself in the language of sensation rather than words. Here, always here, endlessly and only here. Each heartbeat a homecoming, each breath a return, each moment of this yielding, surrendered, quietly miraculous night a confirmation that whatever the not enough feeling has been insisting all this time, the evidence of this moment says otherwise. You are enough. You have always been enough. Sleep now, and let the body remember what the mind has been so slow to learn.